Grandfather named me Chloe. My full name is Chloe Evans. Human life is full of suffering. Grandfather said it was as if I came into this world just to survive a trial. He said if I could just get through it, I'd have a peaceful, smooth life. But now, I'm sick and dying. I still want to see my mom. I want to go back to Mayfield High again. To see Asher there one more time. That summer when I was 15, the first time I ever ran into Asher, he was cornered in an alley and brutally beaten by a gang of punks. In the end, both of us ended up at the police station. Only later did I find out that the man beating Asher the hardest was his own biological father. A lonely girl falling for a lonely boy, it was only natural that it would become the best-kept secret of that summer. You're just a young girl. Even when playing the hero, you have to know your limits. Right, officer? Seeing how quiet and delicate Chloe looked, the officer's tone turned helpless. She felt too embarrassed to keep crying, so she bit her lip with tears still in her eyes. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a pair of eyes that showed absolutely no gratitude. The boys who had started the fight were vocational high school students, and they were being held for extortion. Later on, the police said they needed to call her guardians. When asked about her parents, Chloe shyly and softly begged the officer. She told him she could walk home by herself, and pleaded with him not to call her grandparents. Outside the window, a kind officer was already helping her fix her broken bicycle. By the outdoor sink in the courtyard, the boy was washing the cut on his forehead with tap water. He was bent over, his spine forming a slender, sharp curve. Chloe watched him through the glass, like looking into another, vividly clear world. When the boy looked up, he noticed her too. Their eyes barely met before. Chloe immediately looked away. Her palms were burning hot. The scraped skin on her hand actually hurt quite a bit too. She pulled a pack of tissues from her skirt pocket, the paper slightly damp from being gripped so tightly. As Chloe walked over to him, the boy happened to straighten up. He was very tall, his hair dripping wet with water droplets, revealing a sharp, well-defined face underneath. Caught off guard, she locked eyes with him. The summer heat scorched her heart. Here, you can use this, she said, handing the pack of tissues over to him. Her voice was soft, like a handful of tender spring grass. The boy didn't take them. Instead, he pulled up his shirt hem to carelessly wipe his face. His gaze went straight past her, looking at the figure walking toward the door. His Adam's apple bobbed, and the water droplets glistened with a faint sheen under the sunlight. The boy's expression was tight with restraint, standing perfectly still where he was. On his dark eyebrows, there were still stray water droplets that hadn't been wiped away. Chloe pursed her lips tightly, her ears burning hot as she pulled the tissues back. She stepped to the side a little, waiting for the equally tall man to enter the duty room with the boy, before she slowly lifted her head to steal a glance. What happened next completely caught Chloe off guard. After leaving the police station gates, she squatted down to slowly turn the bicycle pedals, feeling like the chain still wasn't working quite right. It was during this brief pause that she saw the man who had come to pick up the boy turn around and instantly shift his expression. All the politeness he had shown the police just moments ago vanished. A sharp slap landed, hitting the boy so hard he stumbled forward, leaving Chloe completely stunned. The beating didn't stop with that single slap. The man's violence rained down on him like a tempest. With blood at the corner of his mouth, the boy clutched his stomach as he was shoved into a black sedan. It looked far more severe than the group fight from earlier. Chloe watched, completely speechless, an indescribable wave of shock and disbelief passing over her face. But right before the boy got into the car, he distinctly cast another glance in her direction. It was hard to tell if that single glance was accidental or something more. The moment their eyes met, the boy's eyes were completely silent and clear. He was in a miserable state, but he also seemed utterly indifferent, as if being beaten was just a natural fact of life. There was no resistance, hoga, no pain. It was as natural to him as breathing. Throughout that summer, she would often think back to those eyes. Her best friend, Jenna, would come over when her parents were away on business to sleep over with Chloe. Jenna would lean close to her ear, breathing warm air against it. She said, "My mom bought me a bra. You know what? I'm not wearing those little undershirts anymore. It's the kind grown-ups wear. Do you have a bra yet?" Chloe's face burned hot in the darkness. Jenna grabbed her hand, carefully and tentatively guiding it onto a patch of softness. Chloe's heart pounded wildly. Jenna added, "My mom said that once girls develop to a certain point, they should start wearing them. Feel it, right?" I'm not a flat-chested princess like you, Chloe. As she spoke, she covered her mouth, giggling and teasing her. Chloe's face turned even redder. Let me feel yours too, okay? Jenna negotiated with her, and as soon as she finished speaking, she slyly reached over and felt Chloe. Then she gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes widening. Oh my gosh, when did you develop too? Chloe pulled up the silk quilt her grandmother had made in the countryside. To cover her mouth, her voice muffled. I don't know either, she mumbled. Jenna just kept giggling. Because it was a secretive laugh, and she was afraid of alerting the adults in the next room, she kept her voice incredibly low, sounding like a breathless little hen. Jenna was incredibly tough. A total spitfire, scolding the boys in class every day until they didn't even dare to breathe wrong. Especially her deskmate, a boy named Kyle. She would tug on his ear, forcing him to let her copy his math homework. Completely unreasonable and bossy. Just like that, Jenna spent 3 chaotic years running wild. Yet she somehow aced her high school entrance exams beyond all expectations, getting into top-tier Mayfield High, along with Chloe. Even Kyle didn't score as well as she did. It was truly strange. She copied his homework every single day, yet she ended up scoring higher than him. Some things in this world just don't make any sense. Take Jenna, for example. She had started using pads back in the 7th grade. Chloe was actually a few days older than her, and she was about to start high school, yet she had never even had to use a pad before. But, thank goodness, after Jenna whispered and giggled with her, and they spent a few nights sleeping over together. One morning, right before school was about to start, Chloe discovered a bright red stain on her bedsheets. Jenna immediately gave her a crash course, took her to pick out pads, and taught her exactly how to use them. She warned her not to catch a chill or eat ice cream, nagging her just like an old mother hen. In the bathroom, there was the faint scent of a first period, and the nameless, overwhelming melancholy of a teenage girl. It was a little embarrassing, like a piece of finely textured jade, being turned over and rubbed relentlessly in one's palm. Around this time, it started raining, pouring down without pause. Her grandmother looked over at her, asking Chloe if her first period had finally arrived. Chloe felt an inexplicable wave of shame. Outside the window, raindrops pattered against the leaves. The days felt like a bronze mirror coated in green rust, thick with heavy, damp moisture. It formed a stark contrast to the blazing sun of early summer. Chloe scrubbed hard, washing away the bloodstains accidentally left on her underwear. She was easily embarrassed, and the faint, stubborn marks on her white cotton underwear were the exact shape of her embarrassment in that moment. At the end of this summer, the young girl, Chloe, truly embarked on her long, confusing journey through puberty. The start of the school year at Mayfield High was always bustling. A banner welcoming new students stretched across the main gate, replacing the previous year's top scorers who had already been celebrated for months. Yet the honor board was still swarming with the parents of freshmen, a dense sea of moving heads. The eyes of the middle-aged adults shone with a rare light as they looked through the glass case at the names, Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. The parents praised them one after another, as if those were their own children, representing a beautiful future they could reach in 3 years. Grandfather was among them. He looked sturdy and fit, dressed neatly and cleanly, maintaining the dignity of a retired blue-collar worker. He was being bumped and jostled by the crowd, but he still craned his neck forward, trying his best to see the students on the honor roll. Old man, stop squeezing in here. Checking which class the kid got into is what matters. Grandmother started tugging at her husband. There were no honors classes for freshmen. They were all regular classes, arranged in order based on their entrance exam scores. Once a class filled up, the list continued down from class 1. Chloe, did you see which class you're in? Grandmother found Chloe in the crowd. The 2 girls were huddled closely together, searching for their names. Jenna suddenly shrieked, and then violently shook Chloe's arm. Class 2. God must have heard my prayers. You and I are both in class 2. This is absolutely amazing. Chloe, delicate as she was shaken so hard she could barely stand. Hearing this, grandmother looked pleasantly surprised. Jenna is in the same class as you? Next up was finding their dorm rooms. Jenna ran incredibly fast, shouting something about needing to snag a good spot. The freshman girls' dorm building was on the way to the cafeteria. On the balconies, colorful clothes hung out to dry by the upperclassmen already filled the lines. As Jenna rushed into the dorm room, her mother and Chloe's grandparents followed behind, walking at a leisurely pace. The beds near the door are the worst. There's too much noise from people coming and going. and it's freezing in the winter. Jenna snagged a bunk bed near the balcony. She tossed her backpack onto the top bunk and plopped herself down on the bottom bunk, smiling brightly at the other parents who walked in soon after. "Hi, is anyone taking this bunk bed?" Jenna was quite crafty. The boys' dorm was right across from them. She had heard that after lights out, the boys would whistle toward the girls' dorm, and some would even show off by playing the guitar or belting out love songs. In short, the gossip about Mayfield High was thoroughly thrilling. Jenna couldn't wait to fully experience her brand new high school life. Chloe got a bottom bunk. The first day was a mix of chaos and excitement. On every vibrant, youthful face, anticipation for the future was written clear as day. The dorm was an 8-person room. Under the encouragement of their parents, the girls mostly introduced themselves with a touch of reserved politeness, sharing their names. "This little girl has such fair skin and is so pretty," someone complimented Chloe. A lingering, damp scent from the recent rain still drifted through the dorm, lacking the intensity of the downpour, but still hanging in the air, making everything feel a bit noisy as people praised her. Chloe merely pursed her lips and offered a silent smile. The mosquitoes were ruthless during this season. The mothers helped their daughters hang up their mosquito nets and arrange their bedding, not forgetting to cheerfully remind them to get along with their roommates. "Don't get into any arguments. You're all high schoolers now. You've grown up." Grandmother gripped Chloe's hand, rubbing it repeatedly, as she softly reminded her of various little chores. Chloe just kept nodding her head gently. "Make sure you remember to tell the teacher about orientation camp. Don't overexert yourself, okay?" Grandmother patted her hand. Still looking a bit worried, Chloe said, "I know, I won't forget." That's good, said Grandmother murmured a couple of times. At noon, the two families originally planned to eat at a small restaurant near the gate, but unfortunately it was too crowded. Jenna's mother drove them to a place a bit further away. After having lunch, she dropped the two girls back off, and the parents' job was basically done. As soon as the adults left, Jenna cheered with joy, dragging Chloe all over the campus, until they were completely familiar with the surroundings. By the time evening study hall arrived, inside the classroom, unfamiliar faces walked in one after another. Some were lucky enough to still be in the same class as their old middle school classmates, and were absolutely thrilled. Others had tested in from smaller surrounding towns, knowing absolutely no one, and were trying to make small talk. Jenna scanned the room and confirmed that, aside from Chloe, she didn't know a single soul. She sat down in relief, but refusing to give up, she leaned over her desk and stealthily glanced toward the back rows, checking if there were any cute boys in the class. Chloe overheard some girls already chatting about the TV shows they watched over the summer, their giggles never ceasing. The classroom was loud and chaotic, and nobody knew where the homeroom teacher was. Everyone had a lot to say, thoroughly letting loose. Seating was unassigned. Jenna preferred hanging out with guys, so she headed straight toward the back. Upon entering the room, the back was almost entirely filled with boys. When Chloe walked over with her eyes cast down, the boys visibly let out a collective whistle. She didn't say anything, choosing instead to just flip through her book. A boy behind her lightly poked her back, so Chloe only turned halfway around. This allowed the boy to get a clear look at her face. "Hey, what's your name?" "I'm Dylan." The boy introduced himself openly. Jenna had already turned around, bursting into a giggle. A look of pure gossip plastered across her face. Chloe's face turned slightly red. "I'm Chloe. Your name is really unique." Dylan opened the floodgates of conversation. "Is your name related to water?" "What a coincidence. My name means the ocean." Hearing this, Jenna curled her lips from the side. "Dylan, you're really stretching here. You won't even let a water connection slide. Are you lacking water or something?" Dylan replied quite seriously. "Why? Are you lacking water too?" "I'm not lacking water, but my mom says I'm lacking a brain." Jenna cracked a joke at her own expense without a single care. Sure enough, the boys in the back burst into a roar of laughter upon hearing this. Just like that, she was soon chatting up a storm with them. Eventually, Jenna simply turned her entire body around to face the back. She was a social butterfly who could hit it off with anyone. Chloe, on the other hand, was the kind of girl who was always incredibly shy. She didn't like to talk, and could never manage to blend in with her classmates. With the same effortless ease as Jenna, she preferred to quietly observe everyone from the shadows. Though hypocritically, she hated when others focused on her. The classroom remained noisy and chaotic. Yet Chloe felt a sense of profound stillness in her heart. Seeing Jenna completely absorbed in her conversation with the boys, she didn't bother her. Inside her desk drawer, there was a plastic shopping bag from a clothing store. Curiously, once they started high school, nobody liked wearing backpacks anymore. They all preferred carrying a single plastic bag to hold their loose school supplies. After a little more time passed, some wouldn't even bother using a plastic bag at all. Chloe fished out a small pack of tissues, pulled one out, and tucked it into the pocket of her denim skirt. The hallway was completely empty. The classroom was brightly lit, and under the stark white light, it was filled with chattering high school freshmen. Every single classroom was just as lively and disorganized. Chloe didn't share Jenna's habit of boldly peeking inside other classrooms whenever she passed them by. Just as she reached the corner and was about to head downstairs, she nearly collided head-on with someone. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't been walking fast. It was a boy taking the stairs 2 at a time, bounding up with large strides and bumping straight into Chloe, forcing her back 2 steps. Almost in unison, both of them said, "Sorry." As those words left her mouth, she subconsciously looked up, her pupils shrinking slightly in shock. The boy didn't even look at her. He just apologized hurriedly and brushed past her. There was no blood on his face this time, and he looked completely neat and clean. Chloe couldn't help but slowly turn around, resting her chin on her shoulder, as she carefully watched his retreating figure, wondering exactly where he was heading. But whether it was the back door of Class 3 or the front door of Class 4, another figure suddenly flashed into view. Chloe caught herself and quickly snapped her gaze back. In her panic, she guiltily squatted down to pretend to tie her shoelaces. This sudden turn of events caused her face to flush bright red. Once the person walked past, she sneaked a quick glance over, only to find that the boy had already vanished. Is he from Mayfield High too? He looks completely different as a high school freshman compared to last time. Last time, she had thought he was some thug, the kind who got terrible grades, idled away their days at a vocational school, dating, smoking, and getting into fights. Like most kids her age, Chloe held a certain stereotype toward vocational school students. Although he didn't look like a thug now that she saw him again, he didn't exactly look like a golden boy either. With her mind filled with a tangled mess of thoughts, Chloe turned on the tap and scooped up a handful of cold water to splash onto her face. She was curious about him. It was the first time she'd ever felt curious about someone. This curiosity was a very subtle sensation, like a thin layer of mist spreading through her heart. But it wasn't strong enough to disrupt her daily life. After she returned to the classroom, she couldn't help but glance toward the boys in the back row, quickly snapping her eyes back as if nothing had happened. "Is Chloe looking at me?" Dylan, who had been staring at her since she walked in, suddenly joked loudly. Chloe was instantly mortified. She shook her head, smoothed down her skirt, and just as she sat down, a man walked into the classroom. The room fell silent in an instant. It was their homeroom teacher, Mr. Miller, a slightly chubby man, who looked rather old for his age. Yet, he claimed he had only graduated from college 2 years ago. Mr. Miller was quite humorous. "I'm 25 this year. You guys might think I look 40, but I'm actually still young. I can't help it. My looks just skip straight to the final stage. But the biggest perk of looking old early is that I'll still look exactly like this when I actually hit 40. Believe it or not, come back and check on me when I'm 40 to see if it's true. And see if that's the case." A wave of laughter erupted throughout the classroom, and Chloe couldn't help but smile slightly too. She did the math in her head. When the teacher turned 40, which meant 15 years from now, she would be 30 years old. 30 felt incredibly old. To a teenage girl, the number 30 felt distant and ancient. She really wondered what she would look like at 30. Chloe thought to herself, "I don't want a permed afro like the aunt next door. And I don't want to wear those tight pencil skirts either. I still want to wear sneakers and denim skirts." Next up was a 1-minute self-introduction for every student. When Chloe went up, a low murmur rippled through the room again. Her skin was fair as snow, yet her eyebrows were dark and defined. The students immediately understood firsthand what it meant to have features as striking as a painting. She was very shy, her long eyelashes fluttering over her bright eyes, completely unsure of where to look. She resorted to keeping her eyes fixed on Jenna the entire time. Mr. Miller stood to the side holding the class roster, which listed their high school entrance exam scores. Once Chloe wrapped up her brief 2-sentence introduction, Mr. Miller called out to stop her. Chloe, can you serve as our literature representative first? I see you have the highest score in this subject. Mr. Miller. Chloe was the literature representative for all 3 years of middle school. Her essays even won awards. Choose her! Jenna cheered loudly from her seat to support her. At this, the tips of Chloe's ears flushed bright red. She hurriedly gave the teacher her nod of agreement and rushed back to her seat, giving Jenna a light swat. That evening, the teacher put together a makeshift student leadership committee, appointing various class representatives, and then sent the boys to go fetch the textbooks. The boys grouped up and quickly left the classroom together, talking and laughing. Military training was a formal back-to-school tradition. Before it began, the freshmen stood on the sports field in a dense crowd wearing ill-fitting green utility uniforms. As they gathered, the scorching sunlight began to bake their faces, and everyone started complaining, wondering why it couldn't have rained this week instead. After a wave of quiet murmurs, they fell silent again, under their homeroom teacher's sharp gaze. Up on the stage, the administrators took turns giving speeches. Every single one of them started with, "Next, I'll say just a few words." But everyone knew exactly what an adult's few words meant, 20 minutes at the absolute minimum. By the time the so-called freshman representative took the stage, the crowd below had completely lost their patience. After all, the opening ceremony had already dragged on for over 2 hours. The stage was covered, but the students were standing directly under the blazing sun. A few of the frailer girls had already fainted, and were carried off to the clinic. Sigh. Who knows how long this representative is going to talk? They promised it would be over in an hour. I'm burning alive out here. Can we hurry it up? It's so annoying listening to the same old respected administrators, beloved teachers, and hello everyone. In this beautiful, crisp September autumn, I am deeply honored to be chosen as the freshman representative. One of the boys jokingly mimicked the typical speech template, shifting the gloomy atmosphere, and everyone couldn't help but stifle a laugh. But their laughter quickly died down, and their spirits lifted slightly. It was Asher. It really was him. That guy, he's the one who ranked first overall. He's so handsome, he's in class 1, right? Right next door to us. Feeling slightly lightheaded, Chloe gritted her teeth and looked up. The boy standing on the stage was Asher. There wasn't a single freshman who didn't know that name. Put simply, he had scored the highest on the entrance exam, placing him in class 1. She stared at him in utter shock. He wasn't some thug. He was the number 1 ranked student in the entire city. It turned out she had known his name all along. Chloe wiped away the sweat trickling down her neck. After Asher walked onto the stage, he first bowed to the administrators on stage, then stepped up to the microphone. He stuffed the speech his homeroom teacher had pre-approved straight into his pocket, his expression perfectly calm. Hello everyone. You've all been standing for over 2 hours, so I'll keep this short. I'm glad we are all here at Mayfield High today. This places us one step closer to our original dreams. I hope that all of us can do the same here. Study hard, live well, and as always, make the most of our youth. Thank you. That concludes my speech. Sorry for taking up your time. The boy offered a brief bow after speaking, turned around, and walked off the stage. The entire sports field fell dead silent for a split second. No one had expected that Asher, acting as the freshman representative, wouldn't use the prepared speech script at all. It was just a 1-minute, completely improvised speech, leaving the administrators and teachers looking at each other in bewilderment, along with the thoroughly stunned students. Then, someone in the crowd shouted, "Nice!" instantly followed by a thunderous, roaring wave of applause. And amidst that deafening applause, Chloe's body went completely limp, and she fainted. This was bound to be an unforgettable opening ceremony. The unconventional speech by Mayfield High's top freshman, the scorching autumn sun, the restless emotions, and the girl who had collapsed, all of these combined to form the very first memory of this class's journey at Mayfield High. Chloe wasn't the only one who fainted that day. After standing for nearly 3 hours, word had it that a boy from class 12 had also collapsed straight down. In the eyes of the teachers, such incidents merely proved how poor the physical health of modern kids was. Still, having the sheer nerve to bypass his homeroom teacher, discard the prepared speech script, and take it upon himself to change his words on the spot. That honor belonged solely to Asher. Now, absolutely everyone knew exactly who he was. As for whether he faced any reprimand from the teachers, no one really knew. But according to high school logic, When it came to top-tier students, as long as they only made a minor, harmless mistake, the teachers wouldn't pursue it at all. What's more, in the eyes of the Mayfield High freshman, Asher had instantly become a symbol of sheer, distinct individuality. At this age, everyone wanted to showcase their own uniqueness. So when someone actually did what everyone else was too afraid to do, he naturally became an idol. It certainly helped that Asher already carried the aura of a genius. The weather forecast predicted clear, beautiful conditions for the entire week. Forget rain, there wasn't even a single wisp of cloud in the sky. With the fierce sun beating down, the cicadas buzzed relentlessly. Everyone was sweating so much their faces looked oily, and their bangs clumped into greasy strands, forcing them to wash their hair every single day. The drills instructor was brutal, and loved pulling sneak attacks, suddenly kicking the back of your knees from behind, just to see if you were actually standing perfectly straight. Unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, whenever he kicked someone, their legs would buckle, leaving them barely able to stand. The one being kicked would be startled first, before silently cursing the instructor in their head. Everyone's face was flushed, a dark, sunburned red, across the massive sports field. If you happened to notice another class already resting under the shade of the trees, you'd instantly turn green with envy. Chloe sat by herself along the sidelines in her utility uniform. She couldn't participate due to her health, but she insisted on staying out on the sports field, refusing to leave until they were dismissed. Oh my God, I'm burning alive out here. I'm seriously terrified I'm going to drop dead. During a rest break, Jenna ran over and plopped down next to Chloe. The moment her butt hit the ground, Dylan walked over, cradling several bottles of water in his arms. He handed one to Chloe first, then gave one to Jenna. Wow, look at you being so generous. Jenna twisted the cap off and began chugging the water down. Just re-gifting a favor. It's no trouble at all. Dylan tilted his chin up, signaling for the two of them to look toward the south. Over there, a girl with slightly tanned skin, a subtle overbite, but incredibly striking eyes was handing out water to everyone. It was Mackenzie. Jenna recalled that during the self-introductions, everyone had snickered when that name was announced. Mackenzie wasn't very tall, but her teeth were exceptionally white. Seeing everyone laugh, she hadn't panicked or gotten upset. Instead, she smoothly wrote 3 beautiful words on the blackboard, telling everyone that her name meant a beautiful rose, asking them not to misunderstand. She was the top student in class too, her entrance exam score trailing right behind Asher's. The moment she wrote that, paired with her confident, bright smile, everyone instantly felt like they were the uncultured ones. Mr. Miller had already appointed her as the academic rep, but right now Mackenzie was acting exactly like a class president, taking care of her classmates in an orderly fashion. Jenna clicked her tongue twice. Did she buy this water with her own money? Yeah, Mackenzie is really generous. My roommate knows her. Her family is really well off. Her dad is a government official, and her mom is a university professor. They're both prominent figures. There was absolutely nothing Dylan didn't know. He knew the inside scoop on every little detail, looking completely delighted as he shared the gossip. Jenna thoroughly despised that sort of attitude. She curled her lips again. For a guy, you're a total gossip queen. And you're such a snob too. Do you guys seriously like gossiping about a girl's family background behind her back? Like it's any of your business. You all just want to suck up to Mackenzie, don't you? Why are you picking a fight out of nowhere? Mackenzie just happens to have a good background. You're just jealous, aren't you? The two of them began bickering back and forth, with Jenna tearing into Dylan relentlessly. Instead of getting angry, he actually grinned, which only made Jenna's blood boil even more, as she cursed Dylan for being a total pain. Even though they had only known each other for 2 days, their friendship was progressing at lightning speed through their bickering. Chloe just kept smiling quietly the whole time. She shifted her seat a bit, afraid that Jenna might accidentally hit her, while chasing Dylan, causing her to get caught in the crossfire. Chloe, how are you feeling? Are you doing all right? Mackenzie walked over, her tone full of concern. This was a task assigned to her by Mr. Miller. Chloe didn't want to receive special treatment. Fainting at the ceremony was already embarrassing enough. Some kids in class were already secretly calling her Bella, a nickname that didn't exactly make her happy. It seemed like just because her health was a bit frail, people were quick to slap a tragic label on her. If that were the case, then the tragic label was a bit too cheap. She pulled out the newspaper underneath her and placed it next to her. Mackenzie, do you want to sit down for a bit? I'm fine, Mackenzie offered a slight smile, handing her another bottle of water. If you feel unwell at any point, Make sure to let me know right away. Don't be shy. The girl possessed a kind of mature liveliness, a vibe that was hard to pin down, since it was rare to see a high schooler balance those qualities so harmoniously. Just as Chloe was about to say something more, her breath hitched. A not-so-unfamiliar figure was walking right toward them. The boy had taken off his cap, holding it in his hand as he mindlessly tapped it against his leg. He was heading over here, and not far away, a dozen pairs of eyes were watching his every move. Who bought this water? Asher was speaking directly to Mackenzie. His demeanor was detached, and the slight frown on his face when he spoke always made him look rather intimidating. I'm taking a bottle. He wasn't speaking to her. Chloe lowered her eyes, her gaze trembling slightly as it slipped downward. She gripped the water bottle in her hand, remaining perfectly still, as if completely rooted to the spot by something, staring intently at the sandy ground by her feet. She didn't know why her heart was beating so fast, feeling a rush of panic, but her hearing became exceptionally sharp. She heard Mackenzie's voice trace with a smile. Why are you being so polite with me? Take a few more bottles. Thanks. Asher offered a brief gesture, his gaze dropping, as he carelessly swept a glance over Chloe before looking up, to lock eyes with Jenna, whose face was practically raring to go. It was glaringly obvious that the girl was excitedly gearing up to find a way to strike up a conversation with him. Fangirl, Asher thought, averting his gaze with a hint of annoyance, as he turned around and walked away. Do you know Asher? Jenna immediately asked Mackenzie. Mackenzie looked completely unfazed. Yeah, we were middle school classmates. Sometimes I'd rank first overall, and sometimes he'd rank first. Unfortunately, I couldn't beat him on the high school entrance exam. The girl's natural superiority as a top student slipped out effortlessly, leaving Jenna only able to look up in admiration. Wow, you guys are both so amazing. Before she could pry further, the assembly whistle blew. Jenna could only pat Chloe on the shoulder. So annoying, it's starting again. I'm off. Chloe only felt an uncomfortable fluttering remaining in her chest. Once everyone had moved far away, she finally felt like she was in a safe space, only then letting her gaze wander into the distance. Amidst the sea of identical green uniforms, she searched for that tall figure. From such a distance, no one would ever know who her eyes were looking for, but she was quite terrible at it. Separated by such a gap, she truly couldn't find his figure anywhere. After all, Asher wasn't the only tall boy around. Whether it was her stomach or her abdomen, waves of discomfort were becoming increasingly obvious. Chloe grabbed her cap, stood up, and headed toward the restroom. This was terrible. Ever since her first period arrived, it had been incredibly irregular. This was only the second time. Her period had come again. Chloe rushed out of the restroom in a panic, without even washing her hands, when a figure blocked her path. We've met before, haven't we? Asher's voice rang out crystal clear. Chloe froze. The campus was dead silent. Everyone was out on the sports field for orientation camp. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in glowing rings, reflecting on the boy's face. She could even see the fine texture of his skin with perfect clarity. Chloe felt like her mouth had completely frozen. She gave a mechanical nod. Keep your mouth shut, Asher said, offering just those few words. It sounded incredibly harsh. Chloe couldn't help but clutch her uniform pants, a look of deep embarrassment on her face. What? Her face, usually so fair it was almost translucent, instantly flushed bright red. She truly didn't understand the threat. Hey, we met at the police station over the summer. Act like you didn't see a thing. If you're not stupid, you should know exactly what I mean. The moment Asher spoke, he carried a natural edge, completely at odds with Chloe's idea of a top-ranked student. In fact, he was a far cry from the boy who had just spoken. On the main stage, her throat felt tight, and she hurriedly lowered her head, saying, I didn't say anything, and I haven't spread rumors about you. I don't even know you. Chloe felt like Asher might actually hit her. She was actually very timid, afraid of causing trouble, and, of course, terrified of getting beaten up. As for that incident over the summer, she didn't even know where. She had found the courage at the time. You don't know me. Asher let out an imperceptible scoff. There was a hint of precocious sharpness in his arrogance. Yet you know my name. Chloe couldn't deny it, so she could only give a soft nod. Asher looked nothing like a top student. The way he carried himself made him look exactly like a school bully who skipped class, got into fights, and constantly had his parents called in. Yet, looking closely at the boy's features, he possessed a blossoming handsomeness, with a touch of scholarly refinement. But every move he made was tense, and sharp. Those eyes, the ones she had occasionally remembered over the course of the summer, were now staring down at her with absolute malice. Whenever Chloe got nervous, she wanted to pretend to tie her shoelaces. Compelled by some strange impulse, she squatted down, mumbling, "Don't worry. I don't like gossiping about other people." Her heart felt like it was shrinking into a tiny apricot pit. His shadow fell over her shoes, and Chloe's fingers dipped in and out of his shadow, as she reached into the sunlight, flickering between light and dark. When she suddenly stood up, her vision went completely black for a moment. She reached out and grabbed Asher's arm purely out of instinct. The boy instinctively stabilized her, asking in a freezing tone, What do you think you're doing? I didn't even do anything to you." It took Chloe a few seconds for her vision to slowly clear up again. Her complexion looked terrible, her gaze frail and weak, as she looked at Asher rather blankly. The other boy knitted his brows tightly. "Are you crazy?" No matter how she heard it, it sounded like an insult. Chloe desperately wanted to explain that she wasn't feeling well, and that her period had started again, but that was obviously something she couldn't say out loud. Yet right now, it wasn't a question of whether she should say it. A sudden wave of nausea surged up from her stomach, rushing straight to her throat. The next second, she threw up all over Asher. Chloe's mind went completely blank with a loud bang. This time, she was absolutely certain Asher was going to hit her. Sure enough, Asher's face turned incredibly dark. With a frigid expression, he stripped off his jacket, revealing the white short-sleeve shirt underneath. "Hey, wash this, and get it back to me as soon as possible." The boy shoved the foul-smelling jacket into Chloe's arms. Chloe was on the verge of tears. She didn't even dare to look Asher in the eye, utterly mortified, her brain operating purely on autopilot as her mouth blurted, "I'm so sorry. Apologies are useless. Just make sure you wash my jacket." Asher had absolutely no patience for empty, superficial pleasantries.
Ow.
He glanced at her twice, pointed a hand and said, "The clinic is over that way," having absolutely no intention of walking her there. With that, the boy walked away toward the main campus sports field. The chorus of cicadas buzzed endlessly, deafening to the ears. Chloe stood rooted to the spot, holding the boy's soiled jacket, completely frozen for a moment. After just a few minutes, Mackenzie came walking over, looking around. Seeing her made Chloe feel even more embarrassed. The worst part was that she was still cradling a boy's jacket in her arms, and the smell was far from pleasant. As Mackenzie drew closer, Chloe automatically took a few steps back to keep her distance. Sometimes, when faced with overwhelming kindness, Chloe tended to become exceptionally passive around girls like Mackenzie, appearing incredibly reserved. She didn't want to explain her embarrassment, but she had no choice but to offer a small explanation. Going to the clinic to buy pads and getting escorted back to the dorm. After the entire ordeal was over, Chloe had said thank you countless times. Mackenzie very naturally stroked her smooth, long hair, saying with a bright smile, "We're classmates. Why are you always so polite?" Her gestures felt exactly like talking to a little sister. Normally, Chloe didn't like it when others sat on the edge of her bed, and she would never casually sit on someone else's bed either. Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you. She still understood that basic principle. But Mackenzie had been running around, under the blazing sun, making her face flush even redder. When Chloe invited her to sit down, she discreetly pulled away an old yellow bath towel from the edge of the bed. When she had laid it out that day, she had deliberately told Jenna with a bit of a guilty conscience, "Washing bedsheets is such a hassle. If I lay something down, I won't have to wash the sheets so frequently." Her roommates nearby were all busy organizing their own spaces, and in reality, no one was paying attention to what Chloe was saying. But Jenna shared absolutely no unspoken understanding with her, blurted out loudly without a single thought, "Are you just afraid of people sitting on your bed?" Chloe wanted nothing more than to crawl into a hole and die. Blushing furiously, she repeatedly denied it out of pure guilt. But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Someone actually chimed in half seriously, saying they didn't like people sitting on their beds either, praising Chloe's method as a great idea that they could copy. Chloe envied others for being able to voice their true thoughts so easily, without a single shred of awkwardness, doing it so naturally and flawlessly. This was something Chloe could never learn to do. Right now, she was worried Mackenzie might overthink it, since the other girl had just so enthusiastically helped her out. Mackenzie acted as though she hadn't noticed that scene at all. She sat down naturally and brought up a topic. "Hey, and Chloe, I noticed you got a near-perfect score on the literature section of the entrance exam. Your literature grades must have always been amazing, right? Would you be interested in working on a small research project with me? Chloe's middle school was only considered average in the city. Every year, through general and targeted admissions, it sent around 70 to 80 students to Mayfield High. Targeted spots were quotas allocated to each middle school, allowing students in with scores 20 to 30 points lower than general admission. Chloe leaned slightly toward humanities, and both she and Jenna had gotten in through the targeted quota. They were considered quite lucky. Therefore, at Mayfield High, which was packed with geniuses, she had no competitive edge to speak of. Having excellent grades in literature alone didn't mean much. Mackenzie, on the other hand, had tested in from the best middle school in the city. Her literature score was actually only 2 points lower than Chloe's. The two of them chatted for a while. Mackenzie's mind was incredibly sharp, and she spoke very fast. But Chloe clearly knew the gap between herself and a top-tier middle school student. Mackenzie's literature grades were excellent too. She was great at every subject, which was completely different from Chloe, who was just naturally good at literature, and got good grades simply because she enjoyed the subject. It wasn't the same thing at all. Oh my gosh, look at me just chatting away with you. The instructor's going to think I'm slacking off later. I'd better head back now. Let's catch up later. Mackenzie suddenly patted her forehead and offered Chloe a smile. Soon, Chloe was the only one left in the dorm room. She curled up on her quilt to take a quick nap. When she suddenly jolted awake, she hurriedly soaked that dirty jacket in some warm water and stealthily shoved the basin under the bed. Less than half a minute later, Chloe climbed back up and pulled the basin back out, forcing herself to head to the washroom to wash the clothes. The jacket became quite heavy once it soaked up the water. In all her life, she had only ever washed things like her own underwear and socks. After scrubbing it just a few times, her back felt so sore she could barely straighten up. Not only that, but Chloe also kept Jenna's reminders about her period in mind. So every time she rinsed it, she added a bit of warm water. By the time 30 minutes had passed, the girl's face was deathly pale, her forehead covered in cold sweat. In the end, Chloe acted like a thief, hanging the jacket out to dry near the dorm building, on a honeysuckle bush in the small garden. Chloe didn't go back to the sports field that afternoon. Instead, she waited until 4 o'clock, wearing a short-sleeved shirt and her utility pants, pretending that the top she had washed was her own. Forcing herself to look calm, she gathered the jacket, packed it into a plastic shopping bag, and placed it back under the honeysuckle bush. Fortunately, there was barely anyone around campus. The sophomores and juniors were all in class, while the freshmen were out on the sports field. Chloe let out a long sigh of relief, but figuring out how to return it to Asher was a real problem. Chloe didn't want people gossiping about her at all. She knew that if she handed the jacket back to Asher in broad daylight, everyone would definitely start spreading rumors. This kind of thing was something she knew well from middle school. Classmates loved making a scene and gossiping about so-called scandals, who liked whom, or who was secretly dating. She didn't let Jenna know about this, because Jenna was a walking loudspeaker. There were no formal classes during orientation camp, but they still had evening study hall. Many students had already previewed the high school curriculum over the summer, and Chloe was no exception. However, she discovered a very serious problem. High school math suddenly became incredibly difficult, feeling like a completely different world from middle school. It was practically like an alien language. Mayfield High was truly Mayfield High. They had only let the freshmen slack off on the single night of registration. Once orientation camp kicked off, everyone displayed the self-discipline expected of a top-tier high school. Even without a teacher present during evening study hall, the room remained perfectly silent. The evening breeze blew gently through the window. Chloe occasionally looked up from her baffling, incomprehensible math problems. Sitting by the window, she could look through the wide-open windows of the hallway to see the dark indigo sky and the pitch-black silhouettes of the trees. Meanwhile, beside her, Jenna was sneakily eating snacks while flipping through a teen magazine with her greasy fingers. She wasn't worried in the slightest, having made up her mind to only start studying seriously once orientation camp was over. A figure walked past the window. Chloe froze for a second, recognizing Asher at a single glance. Chloe quickly pulled a pad from her desk drawer, asking Jenna to let her through. Her deskmate gave her a knowing look and leaned forward, pressing herself flat against the desk. Chloe squeezed past Jenna's back to get out. She originally wanted to call out to him, but she was terrified someone might suddenly walk out from Class 3 or Class 4. Chloe quickened her pace to keep up. Asher's retreating figure was tall, his legs long, and he walked incredibly fast. If Chloe hadn't misjudged, he was likely heading toward the restroom. She suddenly called out to him just as he was stepping out of the school building. The moment she did, she felt a bit embarrassed, but also strangely happy. Asher didn't turn around at all, acting as if he were completely deaf. Asher. Chloe had no choice but to say his name out loud, her voice very soft, as if terrified of alerting anyone else. The boy stopped in his tracks and turned around. Standing outside the brightly lit school building, he was cast in the dim shadows, looking as though he had triggered some mesmerizing secret mechanism. Chloe held a book tightly against her chest. She was so incredibly shy that she felt she absolutely needed to hold on to something to anchor herself. Even so, the rapid, thumping beats of her heart seemed to reverberate right through the book. Asher was far more open and composed than she was. From beginning to end, he hadn't shown a shred of awkwardness or self-consciousness, just because she had witnessed the most embarrassing moment of his life. "Here," Chloe said, feeling her breath completely stop. As she approached him, she handed him the note she had prepared, her mind screaming, "Just take it quickly. Take it quickly. Please don't let anyone else see us." Asher frowned at first, but then offered a smile, as if completely used to this. He didn't move at all, nudging her hand back with the back of his own. "What you need to give me back is my clean jacket, not some little love letter." Chloe blanked out for a second, staring at him stiffly, her mind buzzing loudly. "No, I'm not confessing to you." Asher glanced at her, letting out an unbothered, "Oh." He didn't think he was being narcissistic at all, nor did he feel even a single shred of embarrassment over his own misunderstanding. That casual, "oh," carried his habitual indifference and utter disinterest in others. All her frantic emotions ultimately caused her to hug her book even tighter. Holding the book close, her face burning red, Chloe took a step toward the restroom first. The handwriting on the note was elegant, featuring a poorly drawn, but painstakingly detailed map. Asher suddenly chuckled, a faint trace of mockery in his smile. He scanned it carelessly, took 2 steps forward, and bent down to pick up something that had dropped from the girl's book. It was a sanitary pad in pink packaging. He stared at it for a few seconds, and once he realized what it was, an utterly indescribable expression washed over the boy's face. Asher casually placed it onto the hallway windowsill. If the girl wasn't stupid, she would definitely come back to look for it. He headed over to the girls' dorm building, and nearby, accurately, and without mistake, retrieved a bag from beneath the honeysuckle bush. The jacket inside was neatly folded, but the instant he opened it, a powerful scent of laundry detergent hit him. It wasn't until he brought it back to his own dorm that Asher noticed the glaring, tragic white streaks of laundry soap left on the jacket. It hadn't been rinsed thoroughly, showing line after line of white residue, looking exactly like dried sweat stains. He chuckled again, grabbed his basin, and went to the washroom to give it a proper rinse a few times. Orientation camp was only a week-long affair. It was short, but this autumn took a turn for the worse. Out of nowhere, someone came down with pink eye, and the bacteria spread incredibly fast. By the 4th day of orientation camp, 20 kids in the class had already caught pink eye. Mr. Miller repeatedly emphasized safety precautions to everyone. Everyone got their wish for the camp drills to stop, but the campus felt like a ghost town. Instead, they just sat around pulling down each other's eyelids to apply eye drops. Chloe didn't catch it, and neither did Jenna, but the girls sitting directly in front of them did, making them both feel incredibly anxious. In front of the literature rep, Callie turned around and offered Chloe a cheeky grin. He never called her by her actual name, always addressing her as representative. As he picked up Chloe's pencil case, he rubbed his own eyes and then wiped them all over it. "Your immune system is so weird. You can't do orientation camp, yet you didn't catch pink eye. We all thought you'd definitely get it since your health is so frail. I'm going to pass it to you, so everyone will be the same." Callie spoke half seriously, grinning the entire time, as if it were nothing more than a harmless prank. Chloe felt anxious inside, but she was too embarrassed to say anything, so she could only force a stiff, dry smile. She watched helplessly as her pencil case was deliberately touched all over by Callie. Once he was finished touching it, and turned around in satisfaction, Chloe opened her mouth, but ultimately didn't say a single word. Why were her new classmates like this? She just felt a quiet wave of disappointment for a moment. Outside the window, an early autumn evening breeze drifted by, sounding almost like a sigh. In the end, thanks to Callie's persistent efforts, Chloe caught the eye infection. Her eyes crusted over with discharge, and she constantly felt like crying. Jenna pinned her down on the bed to apply eye drops. Jenna wasn't afraid of catching it, putting drops in her eyes 3 times a day, and she immediately turned around and gave Callie a harsh scolding. Jenna was dead serious, calling Callie out for being short yet full of petty malice. When Callie started to cry, Jenna snapped, "What are you crying for? You got pink eye yourself and wanted to give it to everyone else. How petty can you be?" Jenna rolled her eyes dramatically. Chloe gently tugged at Jenna's shirt hem, telling her to stop fighting. Jenna looked utterly disdainful, saying, "Callie, if you dare cause trouble again, believe it or not, I'll throw your mattress straight over to the boys' dorm building." The onlookers burst into another roar of laughter. The boys joined in the jeering. "Jenna always keeps her word. You absolutely have to throw it. If you don't do it, you're a chicken." Only Mackenzie was seriously trying to mediate. The classroom was incredibly chaotic and loud, disturbing Class 1 right next door. Their temporary acting class president came over and knocked on the back door window, saying, "Hey, keep it down. Even if you guys aren't studying, other people are trying to." Although they were parallel classes, everyone tacitly agreed that Class 1 had the best grades. Being called out like that made the boys in the back row a bit defiant. "Class isn't even in session right now. Are we not even allowed to talk?" That class president then flashed a look that clearly said, "Is this the best Class 2 can do?" With that, he turned and left. At 15 or 16 years old, they were at their most rebellious stage. Being so blatantly looked down upon by Class 1 triggered everyone's rebellious streak. Since they were still doing orientation camp and hadn't started formal classes yet, the boys started deliberately banging on the desks, loudly singing the orientation camp songs. Very soon, a face everyone recognized appeared at the back window. "Your class is being really loud. Please keep it down." Asher happened to be standing right outside Chloe's window, speaking coldly. His slightly impatient expression, visible to everyone, carried an inexplicable sense of pressure. The classroom fell silent in an instant. Upon hearing his voice, a sudden surge of complex emotions rose tightly within Chloe's heart. She couldn't quite describe it, and her heartbeat spun out of control once again. Suddenly, a warm rush of fluid welled up in her nose, slowly trickling down. Chloe was prone to nosebleeds whenever the autumn air turned dry. She was familiar with this sensation, and had to tilt her head back while blindly fumbling for tissues in her desk. What Asher saw was a girl, with a stream of bright red marking her pale face. Puberty was just that unpredictable, and that bizarre. His mind instantly flashed back to that pink, private girls item. Chloe sensed a gaze landing on her face, and it was Asher. Suddenly, her mind started buzzing, and her only thought was to escape this exact moment as fast as possible. Grabbing a pack of tissues, she rushed out of the classroom purely out of instinct. The hallway was spotless, without even a single scrap of paper on the floor. Every time she lowered her head, a small red flower of blood would splatter onto the floor. Asher watched as Chloe bolted past him. This little interlude quickly passed. Everyone knew that Chloe had someone looking out for her. Implicitly, her fiercely protective best friend, Jenna. Jenna's fighting spirit was off the charts. Forget kids her own age. She could already trade insults with grown women back in the 3rd grade, and ultimately succeed in reducing them to tears. It was true that everyone was here to get into college, and they cared more about their grades. But outside of studying, they always needed a bit of entertainment to spice things up, like watching some drama unfold. In today's drama, Callie was absolutely no match for Jenna. He was the classic definition of a bully who backed down when challenged, and after a few rounds, he was reduced to nothing but tears. No one knew either side well enough yet, so it wasn't as if they harbored any bias, but they still felt a bit disappointed. The kind of disappointment when being a bystander wasn't exciting enough. Callie whimpered and sniveled, completely stopping talking to the two of them. By the time orientation camp wrapped up, Chloe's pink eye was gradually getting better. She was incredibly cautious wherever she went, and she actually believed the ridiculous rumor that just locking eyes with someone could transmit the infection. Because of this, she kept her eyes glued to the ground whenever she spoke to Jenna. Mr. Miller rearranged everyone's seating according to their height. The rows would rotate sideways once every 2 weeks. Over the weekend, Chloe went back home. After taking a quick shower, she sat in her bedroom writing in her diary, while her grandmother was busy cooking. What exactly is a diary? It's a confession of teenage loneliness, recording the mundane details of daily life, capturing distinct moments of scenery, or carrying secret hidden thoughts known to no one else. Chloe was excellent at writing essays, not the kind filled with flashy rhetoric, but a style that was remarkably simple and pure. It was a case of true sophistication masquerading as simplicity. No matter what she wrote, it always possessed an honest, warm, and grounded texture. At first glance, her diary entries seemed a bit like a standard log. How the spring breeze blew, how the autumn mist rolled in, how the sunlight on the sports field made her scalp burn, while the sand piles beneath the trees remained warm. And there was a boy who got incredible grades. He had dark, defined eyebrows, stood very tall, and looked amazing in his clothes. He always looked down on others, seeming rather difficult to get along with. But then again, he had no intention of getting along with me anyway. After writing each line, Chloe would lift her head and stare blankly at the osmanthus tree outside the window for a few seconds. The fragrance of the osmanthus tree was sickeningly sweet. She snapped herself out of it and buried her head back into her writing. When it was time for dinner, her grandmother came over to call her, and her grandfather walked through the front door carrying his small folding stool. The elderly couple were both retired. Grandmother loved grabbing her cloth tote bag to wander around the morning market early in the day, while grandfather enjoyed playing chess with the other old men. Whenever Chloe came back, grandmother would cook up a whole table of food, featuring both meat and vegetables, beautifully arranged in vibrant colors. "Are your eyes all better, sweetheart?" grandmother asked as she ladled a bowl of bone broth for her. Grandfather had already scrutinized Chloe from head to toe, saying, "Looks like our girl is doing just fine." Chloe was the type to share only good news and keep her worries to herself. She talked about the funny stories from orientation camp, mimicking their homeroom teacher's tone of voice, and the drills instructor's strict demeanor, keeping her grandmother laughing non-stop. Only when Chloe was home did the house truly feel like a home, lively and filled with talking and laughing, making even the old furniture look brand new. As they wrapped up dinner, grandmother subconsciously glanced over at the calendar on the table. Chloe knew exactly what that meant. When was the Mid-Autumn Festival? She had already checked it long ago. That person only came back twice a year. For the Mid-Autumn Festival and New Year's Eve, days meant for family reunions. It was also the day she had to go to her cousin's house. Chloe hadn't spent the Mid-Autumn Festival with her grandparents for many years, and clearly this year was no exception. The two elderly people shared a silent look. Grandmother spoke up, her face filled with guilt. "Sweetheart, is it all right if this Mid-Autumn Festival is just like before?" How could it not be all right? Chloe's expression darkened for a split second, as usual. She offered a smile. "Sure. We have a break from school, so I'll ask Jenna to go to the bookstore with me." Grandmother hesitated, looking as if she wanted to say something. The emotions in her eyes were incredibly complex, completely impossible to put into words. Chloe only knew that the person was her mother. Whenever her mother came home, she had to leave. Otherwise, her mother would never come back. One year, she was truly curious and deeply longing. She thought her mother should like her. She never caused trouble, loved to study, and loved to help out around the house. Just like a gentle little lamb, Jenna would get into screaming matches and hit boys, causing their parents to come to her door. Yet her mother would always take her side. Chloe felt that if her mother could just get to know her a bit better, she would definitely like her. Driven by this hope, she had stealthily sneaked back home. But before she could get a clear look at anything, her grandmother caught her. The elderly woman was utterly terrified, her face losing all color as she shooed her away toward her cousin's house. Chloe felt incredibly wronged. Fighting back tears, she kept looking back, only able to see her grandmother's frantically waving hand, gesturing for her to leave quickly. She cried all the way there. When she arrived at her cousin's front door, she wiped her tears clean before stepping inside. Even so, Chloe never asked the adults, including her cousin's family, what this was all truly about. She felt that if someone wanted to share something, they would tell you without being asked, and if they didn't want to, they wouldn't say anything even if you asked. Why make things difficult for others? And if those others were her family, she shouldn't make things difficult for them at all. As if to compensate her, grandmother gave her extra pocket money as usual. Chloe didn't like spending money recklessly, but this time she planned to spend it. The competition at Mayfield High was brutal. Chloe's grades were only average, giving her very little presence. In the eyes of the teachers, there were only two metrics: Ivy League admission rates and top-tier university acceptance rates. Chloe was extremely worried that she would ultimately only end up at an ordinary college. She didn't have any better method. Drowning herself in test prep strategies and doing endless practice exams seemed to be her only way out. Either way, she wasn't afraid of hard work. However, at Mayfield High, the Tier 1 university acceptance rate was exceptionally high, unless you ranked at the absolute bottom. Whenever Chloe felt anxious, thinking about this would make her feel a bit more relieved. As grandmother cleared the dishes, she heard the two elderly people in the kitchen talking about something in hushed tones. Chloe didn't try to overhear. She silently returned to her bedroom and opened her diary. The crescent moon hung right outside the window, crystal clear, looking a bit like a pale human face. Chloe felt she should wrap up her diary entry, but in the end, she only wrote a single, solitary hymn. There wasn't even a name, just one word, one section, and a single period. Orientation camp was over. The absolute worst part was writing a summary reflection report. This feeling was exactly like having to write an essay after an elementary school spring trip. Thoroughly aggravating. The official essay notebooks hadn't been handed out yet, and everyone was too stingy to even hand in a proper journal notebook. Terrified the literature teacher would just sell it as scrap paper, which would be more trouble than it was worth, so they simply tore a sheet of paper from their notebooks and began scribbling down the same old generic nonsense. As a result, the stack of papers collected was a completely uneven mess, looking quite pathetic, so Chloe sorted them neatly by size. Jenna helped her out while complaining, saying that a person like Chloe just loved doing these kind-hearted deeds that were completely thankless and a total pain in the neck. I'm the literature representative, so it's my duty to get everyone's assignments nicely organized before handing them to the teacher. When Chloe smiled, she revealed a row of neat, tiny teeth, her eyes curling into crescents. Jenna adopted a know-it-all tone. I bet the literature teacher doesn't even look at them. It's just a purely superficial task. You're completely wasting your time, Chloe said softly. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. I don't think it's a waste of time. Stubborn girl, Jenna said with a playful grin, lightly tapping her forehead. When she went to hand in the essays, she walked down the hallway past Class 1 as usual. Asher was currently explaining a problem to Mackenzie. With one hand shoved into his pants pocket, his other hand gestured confidently over Mackenzie's study materials. Everything he did always seemed completely effortless and casual. The moment Chloe saw him, her heart gave a slight flutter, a mix of excitement and nervousness she couldn't quite name. 3 parts. Returning to Yuanxi. Chloe had no idea why her mind suddenly drifted to that classic wuxia show, The Storm Riders. That had been her and Jenna's absolute favorite during childhood. Asher gave off a vibe exactly like the brooding, untamable protagonist. In those brief few seconds, a whole epic, tear-jerking drama had already played out inside her head. No one was looking at her, yet her face flushed bright red. Her peripheral vision carefully and quickly swept over those 2 textbook model students, as if she were harboring some illicit, shameful secret. It's easy to make a fool of oneself when daydreaming. With all of Chloe's attention anchored on the 2 figures, standing by the edge of the hallway, she got clipped by a boy, rushing out of the back door. The essay papers immediately scattered all over the floor. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Along with the boy's apologies, Mackenzie looked over toward the noise. Clutching her materials, she ran right over to help Chloe pick up the essays. Chloe felt like her entire body was about to burst into flames. Fumbling around in a frantic rush, her body went completely stiff, and her limbs felt utterly uncoordinated, as if every single inch of her were surrounded by a certain someone's omnipresent gaze. The reality was, Asher merely cast a detached glance over, recognized Chloe, and showed absolutely no interest. He turned his head back to look out the window. A sudden gust of autumn wind swept past, blowing against the yellowing tree branches, making the leaves that hadn't fallen look ready to drop. Asher spaced out for a brief moment, leaving only his back to Chloe, who was already staring his way. The 2 of them didn't share a single moment of eye contact, and he didn't offer to help either. Clearly, Asher was a thoroughly self-centered person. His speech at the opening ceremony wasn't because he was a kind-hearted soul who wanted to spare his classmates from baking under the sun. It was purely because he found the school administration's speeches boring. He also knew perfectly well that any reprimand from the teachers afterward wouldn't be too severe, for no other reason than the fact that he was the absolute top student in the school. As long as he didn't do anything completely outrageous or break major rules, no one would ever truly call him to account. He was profoundly independent, yet he understood exactly how the system worked. Chloe's eyes stung slightly. She quietly said thank you to Mackenzie, then silently pulled her gaze back, practically jogging down the stairs. The wind was strong, instantly messing up her hair, but it couldn't blow away the deep sense of melancholy within her. He was in the class next door, and they shared absolutely no connection. Chloe suddenly wished she could throw up all over him just one more time. That way, she would have an excuse to return his jacket to him again. But that wouldn't be very good either. The young girl clutched the essay papers tightly, as if holding on to all the secrets and worries of her adolescence. On her way back, the hallway was completely empty. Chloe stared intently at the exact spot where Asher had been standing just moments ago. There was absolutely nothing there. Her heart felt just as blank and hollow. Back at her desk, Jenna's eyes were glowing as bright as light bulbs, sparkling with excitement. Before Chloe could even sit down, Jenna couldn't wait to drag her over, saying in all seriousness, "Asher just smiled at me. You know Asher, right? He likes me." Jenna was just that confident. Chloe felt her heart skip a beat for a second. She forced herself to stay calm, the deafening pounding of her heart making her voice sound completely different from usual. But she still tried her best to act completely unfazed, pretending to look back and asking, "The one who spoke at the opening ceremony? Yeah, I just went to the restroom. And guess what? Asher just happened to come out of the boys' room over there and asked me for a tissue, saying a classmate inside forgot to bring some." Jenna suddenly covered her face and shook her head dramatically. Oh my gosh, it was so embarrassing. I mean, a boy asking you for a tissue right outside the restroom. How awkward is that? But Asher is just so handsome. Even asking for a tissue looks so attractive on him. My mind was completely buzzing. So of course I gave it to him. Then she gave Chloe's arm a hard squeeze, her eyes widening dramatically, and then he smiled at me. Wow, when Asher smiles, my poor little heart, I just can't take it. Chloe felt like she needed a fast-acting heart pill. Jenna's performance was incredibly over the top, and Chloe was shaken back and forth by her grip. A thought flashed through her mind. He has never smiled at me. But what does Asher actually look like when he smiles? Chloe wondered, lowering her gaze slightly, only for her face to be cupped and straightened by Jenna. She said with a grin, "My dear deskmate, I've made up my mind. Starting today, I'm going to pursue Asher. He definitely has feelings for me." Some girls were just always so confident. Take Mackenzie, for example. Because of her stellar grades, and then there was Jenna, who had been loud and boisterous since childhood, doing whatever she set her mind to. Amidst her wildly erratic heartbeat, Chloe managed to find her voice. How are you going to pursue him?" Jenna gave Chloe a mysterious wink. "Chloe, you have to help me write a love letter. You draft it, and I'll copy it over in my own handwriting. That way. Wait, aren't you saving up money to buy that set of classical poetry collection from the official publishing house? The one with 31 volumes in total? How about I buy you 10 of them? Pretty good friend, right?" Asher lived in a massive mansion. A solemn-faced security guard stood at the gate, keeping unauthorized people out. However, the neighborhood's occupancy rate was quite low. First, because the location was somewhat remote, and second, because the price tag was exorbitant. The eastern side bordered a river, where some people liked to sit along the banks for half a day. Fishermen would take the subway and head over at dawn just to snag a spot. But one year, an early rising fisherman discovered a woman's corpse in the river, bloated and deformed from the water. It thoroughly traumatized and disgusted everyone, and the crowd immediately thinned out significantly. Asher's family home happened to be situated right on that eastern side. Whenever he pushed open a window, he could see the lush, overgrown vegetation running wild. Those thick clusters of green possessed a vitality that was almost terrifying. When the female corpse case made waves, everyone was panicking. Asher was in the 7th grade that year, living all by himself in the massive mansion, not even knowing what it meant to feel afraid. The 3rd week of school brought the holiday break for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Asher called over an hourly cleaning lady to tidy up the house. He was going to spend the festival alone, but Richard called and told him to come over for a meal. Asher agreed over the phone, his face completely expressionless. In reality, it wasn't even the day of the festival yet. Richard was inviting him ahead of time. heading to the other side of the city. Took a 20-minute cab ride. His stepmother was a young, beautiful woman. She was 28 and had been with Richard for 10 years. Asher wasn't entirely sure which number woman she was to his father, but she was barely considered the current wife. After all, they shared an 8-year-old son, who was plump and round, possessed a terrible temper, and had awful grades. The kid's teacher called his parents in every other day. Tens of thousands of dollars had been poured into his private elementary school. But unfortunately, Richard had ultimately raised an absolute idiot. Asher didn't really want to be so malicious toward a young child. But the moment the door swung open, the little fat boy arrogantly interrogated him, asking if he had come to their house to beg for food. That intense surge of humiliation felt like scraping bone to a proud teenage boy. He felt a strong urge to kick this brat across the room. His stepmother possessed a superficial, calculated warmth. She called out to Asher and lightly scolded the little fat boy with a few brief words. "I know everything. You're just here to ask for money. You're just a beggar. If Dad doesn't give you money, you'll have to live on the streets." The little fat boy didn't forget to leap onto the sofa, viciously flipping him the middle finger. Who knew where he had picked up such a terrible habit? Asher cast a freezing glare at him. Right at that moment, Richard's car slowly pulled into the courtyard. The stepmother hurriedly called out, "Honey!" With a sharp look from her. The little fat boy quickly bounded away, sprinting toward the door while screaming, "Daddy!" Asher had no choice but to stand up. He walked out and stood there, watching the woman smile, the child's laughter, the briefcase being handed over, the hem of her skirt fluttering in the wind, and the man scooping the boy up in his arms. All the sounds, expressions, and even the faint fragrance drifting from the garden felt like an impenetrable barrier, completely separating him from their world. This sensation was no longer just solitude or loneliness. It was more like utter detachment. The boy simply watched everything unfold with absolute apathy. He greeted Richard with a quiet, "Dad," as the man walked over. Richard was tall and slender, exceptionally well-maintained, possessing a perfectly toned physique that made beating him an absolute breeze. He will grow old one day, the boy thought with chilling detachment. Asher shared a completely hollow, artificial dinner with them. At the dinner table, Richard asked him a few questions about his studies. On the physics quiz they had just taken, Asher had ranked first. This top ranking, as far as Richard was concerned, held value only for his business transactions. Whenever others casually brought it up over drinks, it would yield a few polite compliments. No matter how much he despised Asher, the frustrating part was that Asher looked too much like his mother, blessed with a high IQ, making academic success effortless. Meanwhile, the little fat boy's utter lack of potential made Asher's top rank feel like a thorn buried deep in his chest. "I heard that at your opening ceremony, the school asked you to give a speech, and you spouted complete nonsense up there, humiliating the administrators and teachers. Is that true?" Richard spoke in a slow, deliberate manner. He was a man who loved cleanliness and paid meticulous attention to detail. His leather shoes perpetually polished to a spotless shine, and all his formal suits perfectly pressed without a single wrinkle. Richard's carefully constructed image was that of a successful, elite, middle-aged businessman. Asher didn't know how much of this man's hypocrisy others could actually see through, but he knew every single bit of it. The more peaceful the opening remarks were, the more they hinted at the violent storm to follow. He paused his chopsticks slightly and replied to Richard, "The speech script was too long. The students had already been standing under the sun for a long time, and I didn't want people cursing me behind my back. It seems you think you were entirely justified." Asher remained silent. "If your old man didn't have some influence, and if people didn't show me some basic respect, do you think you'd get away with being this arrogant?" Richard sneered, his piercing gaze bearing straight down on him, like venomous needles piercing into his pores. Only then did Asher realize tonight was a trap. Was it really necessary for Richard to seize any chance to lash out? Did he absolutely have to treat his own biological son like an enemy? Asher no longer cared to make sense of it. He only knew that he couldn't talk back right now. He had to endure and practice restraint. He was still spending Richard's money and living in Richard's house. He merely thought for a few brief seconds. But Richard had already taken his silence as a sign of silent defiance. He picked up his wineglass, and Asher was instantly splashed in the face with red wine. "Speak, your old man is asking you a question. What kind of attitude is it to stay silent?" Richard's face suddenly turned fierce. Asher's chest rose and fell slightly, letting the wine trickle down his face and wind its way onto his neck. The color was bright red, looking a lot like blood. Beside them, his stepmother and the little fat boy watched quietly. The tension between the father and son was on a knife edge. The little fat boy was quite astute. When Richard reprimanded Asher, he kept his mouth shut tightly, his small eyes darting around. Asher just stared at Richard like that. He still didn't say a word. His gaze like a young tiger refusing to be humiliated, as if at any given second, he could bare his still maturing fangs and pounce on him. What kind of look is that? Let me tell you something. The only person you can rely on right now is me. Your mother is too busy sleeping with white guys in America. Richard mentioned his ex-wife in explicit terms. Completely disregarding that, Asher was still a minor. If she actually cared about you, she would have fought for your custody back then. But she didn't want you. How much money has your old man spent raising you all these years? What, you're upset just because I said a couple of things to you? Richard demanded sharply. No. You're right to lecture me, Dad. Asher lowered his eyes. I'm warning you, stop causing trouble for me at school. If I get another phone call saying they need a parent to come down to someplace, I'll break your legs. Richard spoke with absolute authority, maintaining his undeniable dominance. The dinner table fell silent for a few seconds. Only then did his stepmother offer a small smile, advising Richard not to get angry. The little fat boy followed suit, acting cute, as he scooped food into Richard's bowl. This dinner was bound to taste like pure cardboard. After that, Richard chatted with the stepmother about real estate and stocks. He was very good at making money, and was immensely proud of it. Asher had to admit that Richard hadn't shortchanged him when it came to material things. His lifestyle and allowance were far above the average level of his classmates, which was exactly why he had been targeted by those vocational high school thugs. But all of this came at a price. Asher used to think that as long as his grades were excellent, Richard wouldn't beat him. He was wrong. Richard always harbored a nameless, raging fire toward him. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, the streets were packed with people, and all sorts of discount promotions drew in quite a crowd. Chloe went to the city library early in the morning to grab a seat, bringing her study materials. Her schedule was very clear. Math practice exams in the morning, English practice exams in the afternoon, and using any extra time to read her favorite magazines. She had arrived early, so the library wasn't very crowded. The stone tigers at the entrance looked quite imposing, and the air conditioning was nice and cool. Chloe put her backpack into a locker and went to get some hot water. When she came back to find a seat, she suddenly froze as a familiar figure, suddenly and completely without warning. Anne caught her eye. Asher had also arrived early, sitting by the window all by himself. The light filtering through the window outlined the boy's handsome features in a soft, golden glow. This scene felt like a richly detailed painting, and in an instant, Chloe's very breathing became cautious and tentative. She watched him silently for a few seconds, then chose a spot where she could see the boy the moment she looked up, yet could simultaneously remain hidden among the crowd, without drawing any attention. The melancholy of not being able to spend the festival at home instantly vanished into thin air. Running into Asher made it a truly wonderful, beautiful day. A powerful surge of happiness hammered against her chest, but beneath her secret joy lay a subtle, indescribable trace of bashfulness. Still, Chloe was terrified that Asher might notice her. Treading lightly on her tiptoes, she deliberately took the long way around to the bookshelves to search for Booktown magazine, checking several times. Only then did Chloe believe that the library no longer carried the latest issues of Booktown magazine. In the months leading up to the high school entrance exams, Chloe had given up all extracurricular books and magazines. After the exams, she was taken on a trip by Jenna's mother, and on top of studying the high school curriculum over the summer, counting it up carefully, she hadn't read Booktown for nearly a year. The most recent issue available was the December 2005 edition, but that was already from last year. Chloe stared blankly at the bookshelf, pulling out the December issue. The empty slot in the bookshelf left a narrow gap, and caught completely off guard, she locked eyes with a pair of eyes on the other side. Asher was also looking for a magazine. The library was dead silent, but inside Chloe's heart, a storm roared against the shore. The girl's eyes were dark and bright. In her panic, as if completely spellbound, she forgot to look away, staring at Asher without even blinking. Asher was always the absolute center of attention at school. During every Monday's flag-raising ceremony, Acting as the flag bearer, he was the focus of thousands of eyes. Everyone's gaze would be fixed on him. Only in this exact moment did Chloe clearly realize that Asher belonged to her alone. In this enclosed, narrow space, she was the only one looking at Asher, with no one else around. The two of them silently locked eyes like that for a moment. Asher assumed that this girl he ran into had something she wanted to say, but she didn't. She just quietly stared at him. Is something wrong? The boy kept his voice incredibly low. Asking her, Chloe abruptly snapped out of it, her face instantly flushing bright red. Asher had never seen someone have such an intense physical reaction before. Her face, which was originally pale, was suddenly burning like a wildfire across a mountain. Do you know why Booktown magazine only goes up to 2005? In her desperation, she grabbed onto the first question she could think of to save herself. Chloe hadn't expected him to know the answer at all. It was just too awkward, and any random question would do to break the ice. It kicked the bucket, Asher told her flatly, instantly. A mix of shock and disappointment intertwined in the girl's eyes. Asher looked at her and said, "The decline of print media is inevitable. Of course, if the magazine changes its strategy, it might actually resume publication in 6 months, but at the school gates, the newsstand is always packed with students buying teen magazines. How could it be declining?" These were things Chloe rarely thought about at her age. She even found the boy's logic completely foreign. Asher, without a doubt, revealed a very mature side of himself. Chloe's current demeanor, in his eyes, appeared exceptionally childish. Clearly, the girl hadn't quite processed what he said. "How did you know it went out of print?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. Her heart was pounding wildly, and she was terrified of talking to Asher. But if she didn't say anything, it would be a terrible waste. A waste that would leave her filled with regret. Asher saw how she looked a bit slow on the uptake, and suddenly offered a brief smile. I flipped through it from time to time. He walked straight over to Chloe's side, drawing close to her. A crisp scent of orchids drifted off the boy as he approached, and Chloe's heart felt like an old magazine, its pages rustling loudly in the wind. The boy's arm reached past the top of her head, pulling out the December issue. He opened it and pointed out the editor's note for her to read. Chloe was far too nervous. She couldn't take in a single word. Even though the page was covered in text, her mind was nothing but a massive blank space. All good things must come to an end. It kicked the bucket. Asher occasionally displayed a touch of dry humor. The opening phrase was melancholy, while the 2 words at the end were a joke, delivered out of the blue without a single trace of being forced. Chloe abruptly lifted her head to look at him. She couldn't help but clutch the magazine to block half of her face, the corners of her mouth curving up into a faint smile. Asher looked dismissive. "Do all you girls act this dramatic? If you want to laugh, just laugh. Why bother covering your face with a book?" Chloe's smile slowly stiffened. She put down the magazine, revealing a bright red face without saying a word. "Sorry, I didn't know you were this shy," Asher said, looking at her flushed face with utter helplessness. "I'm heading back over." Only after he left did Chloe offer a soft murmur of agreement. Only then did her vision finally return to normal. As she noticed the editor's note announcing the 6-month hiatus, she let out a soft sigh and carried this final and most recent issue back to her seat. Whenever she lifted her head, she could see Asher's focused expression. The sunlight slanted across the room, having long since shifted away from him, but her entire world was still centered on the profile of his face. At some point, when she looked up again, his seat was empty. In that instant, Chloe felt her own heart sink into a profound hollowness. She looked around. Many of the seats were already vacant. There was a KFC near the city library. Chloe rarely ate there, and as she walked in clutching her money, a foreigner was standing before the counter. His skin was pale and flushed, with a thick, scruffy beard covering his jaw, and he was gesturing frantically to the cashier. Clearly, the cashier didn't understand English, and the foreigner didn't understand Chinese. Chloe instantly recalled the trip she took with Jenna over the summer, where they had also run into foreigners. Jenna's mother had urged them to go up, pushing the 2 girls to strike up a conversation in English, and the result, of course, wasn't great. Even Jenna had backed away, so Chloe dared even less to step forward and speak. At the counter, the foreigner was still struggling to communicate with the cashier. Chloe stole a few glances, hesitating over whether she should find somewhere else to eat. She was truly terrified that the cashier might notice her. After all, she was wearing the Mayfield High School uniform. and everyone assumed that kids attending Mayfield High were geniuses. If she were called upon to help, it would be a total disaster. She simply couldn't bring herself to speak up. The cashier actually cast a glance in her direction, so Chloe turned around to leave, walking away out of pure guilt and panic. Thud, she slammed hard straight into the glass door. A sharp spike of pain was mixed with a wave of dizziness, and beneath the dizziness lay an endless, crushing embarrassment. The girl instantly squatted down onto the floor, clutching her head. Strictly speaking, someone outside had pushed the door open, and she just happened to walk right into it. I'm sorry. A figure seemed to drop right in front of her eyes, carrying that crisp scent of orchids. Chloe's head was buzzing loudly, but she still recognized that familiar voice. Tears welled up from the pain, and a bump was already forming on her head. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. Asher slowly helped her up, then bent down to pick up her backpack and guided her to a table. He was actually somewhat surprised that on the Mid-Autumn Festival, this girl would actually be eating at a KFC all by herself. Asking the cashier for some ice cubes, Asher handed them to her. Are you going to be okay on your own? Just sit here for a bit. If you still feel unwell, I'll take you to the hospital. Chloe pressed the ice against her head in silence, thoroughly mortified, but she truly hadn't expected to run into Asher yet again in a place like this. The Mid-Autumn Festival was truly a beautiful holiday. When she quietly sneaked a glance up, she found that Asher had already gone up to the counter to order. He was very naturally using English to converse with the foreigner who needed help, and smoothly sorted out the issue for him. Feeling any better? Asher walked back over and pushed a tray of food items right in front of her, one by one. I didn't know what you girls like to eat, so I just ordered random things. My treat. Asher spent money recklessly, having absolutely no financial planning and never understanding the concept of frugality. The boy leaned in slightly, brushing aside Chloe's blocking hand without a single care. Examining the bump, he said, It shouldn't be a big deal. Does it still hurt? How could this guy be so casual? Chloe was too mortified to move an inch, barely daring to breathe. Ooh, I brought money, she said, pulling out a wad of cash to hand to Asher. But Asher simply shook his head. Just take it as my apology, okay? The boy picked up his own share of the food, moved to a separate table, and pulled out his laptop to work on it while eating. Chloe spotted the logo on the laptop. It was an Apple. Back in those days, most high school students didn't even own a cell phone yet. The occasional student carrying a basic phone would get it confiscated by the homeroom teacher. Asher sat in a completely unreserved posture, resting one long leg casually over his other knee, his upper body leaning out slightly, as he focused entirely on his computer. The boy ate in a completely unrefined manner, his cheeks bulging slightly. Chloe quietly took small bites of her burger, occasionally peering over like a thief, catching a quick glimpse before instantly snapping her eyes back. Her head was still throbbing with sharp spikes of pain, but Chloe completely forgot about the pain. On the Mid-Autumn Festival of 2006, she and Asher had ended up in the exact same space more than once. First the library, now KFC. The boy's naturally sharp, striking frame was slouched in a relaxed, casual angle. As he lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes cast a dense, heavy shadow over his face. It was incredibly magical, Chloe felt. Tiny bursts of pure joy welling up from every corner of her heart. In that exact instant, Chloe suddenly formed a deep desire to build some sort of connection with him. Originally, she hadn't agreed to help Jenna. She couldn't quite vocalize what was wrong with doing it, but she just felt it wasn't right. She couldn't bring herself to deceive Asher. She didn't want to deceive anyone at all, let alone Asher. Was Asher only worth those 10 poetry books? No, he was an absolute priceless treasure. Even though she knew that even as she wrote countless love letters, the final outcome would be nothing more than falling on deaf ears. Chloe even suspected that Asher had already received an entire sack of love letters. Amidst her wild, drifting thoughts, those eyes behind the computer screen casually looked up, locking eyes for a brief, fleeting moment with Chloe's staring gaze. The boy quickly lowered his head again. It was nothing more than a tiny, random break in his train of thought. Yet Chloe was thoroughly startled, and a profound wave of deep disappointment immediately flooded her heart. Asher truly lived up to his reputation. As the school's most unique, top-ranked student, he was always calmly and systematically doing his own thing, as if absolutely no one could ever disrupt his world. She really wondered what Asher would do when he grew up. Chloe thought completely out of the blue, as some ketchup accidentally got smudged onto her wrist. But why isn't he home having dinner on the Mid-Autumn Festival? It was truly baffling. Outside the window, the plane trees were a mottled mix of green and yellow, and looking up through the branches, the sky was split into fragments of brilliant blue. Another afternoon faded away into the sky. Chloe thought silently, eating the food in her hands at a very slow pace. "Hey, watch my things for a second. I'm going to the restroom." Asher had walked over to her side completely unnoticed. Chloe abruptly turned her head, snatching her gaze back from the window. She hurriedly blurted out, "Okay." Asher asked casually, "By the way, what's your name?" He had finally asked for her name. Chloe didn't say a word. Instead, she fished out a pen and paper from her backpack, writing down 2 words, as if performing a solemn ritual. She softly whispered, "This is my name, Chloe." "Chloe," Asher read it aloud, raising an eyebrow as he looked at her, as if those 2 words had suddenly taken on some magical charm. Hearing it fall from his lips felt exactly like a divine blessing. Tiny beads of sweat broke out on the tip of Chloe's nose. He finally knew her name. On the table, the boy's things were scattered about rather messily, a pen lying silently, a laptop with its screen glowing, and a backpack tossed carelessly on the floor. Chloe stared openly at those things without blinking, every single glance filled with a precious meaning. When Asher came out, what he saw was the girl sitting up perfectly straight, her back rigid, looking like a sentinel on guard duty. He couldn't help but chuckle and thank Chloe, then sat back down, busy with who knows what. Time ticked away second by second, and Chloe noticed that Asher had no intention of leaving. He rarely looked up, occasionally closing his eyes to rub his temples. Before long, Chloe fell asleep, resting her head on the table. The library was set to reopen at 2:30, so she wanted to take a quick nap, right here in the KFC. She had a small alarm clock in her backpack, so when it started buzzing, Chloe thought she was at home, and mumbled a call for her grandmother. Opening her eyes, it took her a few seconds to figure out where she was, before she finally lifted her face, which was covered in red sleep marks on one side, just barely awake. Her very first instinct was to check Asher's seat. The boy was currently packing up his things. As if sensing her gaze, he lifted his head, catching the girl's sleepy, thoroughly dazed expression. He offered a small smile, which instantly threw Chloe into a panic, making her instinctively squeeze out a stiff, awkward smile. It turned out their plans were once again perfectly aligned. They walked out the door one after the other, heading back toward the library, walking one behind the other past the traffic lights and around the street corners. Chloe could see Asher's retreating figure with absolute clarity. Sometimes a few people would drift between them, and only after a brief flash would the boy's figure reappear in her line of sight. This sensation felt exactly like a scene from a silent film. The boy soon noticed she was heading in the exact same direction, and clearly quite surprised. He asked, "Aren't you going home?" She hadn't expected him to strike up a conversation on his own. A gust of wind swept past, blowing Chloe's hair into a messy tangle. She originally wanted to say she hadn't finished her homework, but as the words reached the tip of her tongue, for some completely bizarre reason, they somehow turned into a counter-question, "What about you?" The moment she realized what she said, Chloe hurriedly tried to salvage it. No, I haven't finished going through my study materials. I just think the library is a really nice place to study." Asher gave a nod, offering absolutely no answer to her question about him. She gripped her backpack straps tightly, quietly waiting for the library doors to open. The boy's hair possessed a beautiful, glossy sheen, shimmering under the autumn sunlight. Chloe only stole a rapid glance. Although it was slightly awkward, the sky above was a brilliant blue, and the wind blew strong. The world felt no different from how it always had, yet it also felt entirely different. Chloe felt like she barely knew how to contain her love for this world. Just being a human being, being alive like this, was truly wonderful. A soft, faint smile ultimately curved up the corners of the young girl's mouth. She actually wanted to apologize once again for throwing up all over him last time, but some words were turned over and over in her mind so much that she was on the verge of losing her chance to speak them aloud. "Asher," Chloe suddenly called out to him right as he was about to step inside, stopping him in his tracks. It felt as though his name alone could conjure up a mysterious, wondrous world. Hearing her, the boy turned around to let the people behind him go ahead, stepping off to the side as he looked at her inquiringly. "Is something wrong?" Chloe suppressed her fluttering nervousness, doing her absolute best to appear calm. I'm really incredibly sorry about throwing up on you last time. Asher hadn't taken that incident to heart at all, but remembering something, he chuckled, unable to resist teasing her. You dumped an entire bag of laundry detergent in there, didn't you? Chloe looked at him in total confusion. What? If I'd known, I wouldn't have let you wash it. I had to rinse it a dozen more times. Asher said. Chloe finally realized what he was referring to, her face flooding with deep shame. Fumbling awkwardly with the hem of her shirt, she mumbled, I'm not very good at doing laundry. And by the end, I completely ran out of strength. I'm really sorry. Asher smiled and shook his head. Go on inside. Are you still mad at me then? Chloe asked in a soft whisper. Asher looked at her as if he completely failed to understand her train of thought. Why would I care about that? But you seemed really angry back then. I was just in a bad mood, Asher stated dismissively. Chloe blinked in surprise. As for why he had been in a bad mood, Asher clearly had absolutely no desire to explain. The two of them entered the library, and the afternoon flew past in a flash. Once Chloe finished her practice exams, she smoothed down her skirt and ran over to the bookshelves to browse magazines. Peering through the narrow gaps, she could see Asher's silhouette as he sat there studying. Just being able to occasionally look up and steal a glance at him already made her incredibly happy. Right up until the library was about to close, and people began filtering out. Both Chloe and Asher stayed until the absolute last moment. She didn't know why he stayed for so long, but she knew she stayed purely because she was too reluctant to leave him. Opportunities like this were incredibly precious, and there was no telling when their next crossing of paths would be. She had already used her basic phone to text her cousin, to let her know she would be heading back a little late. Just as she slid the magazine back into place, Asher walked over to return his periodicals too. He asked quite naturally, still not going home? Chloe offered a mumbled, hesitant response, and then asked, Are you heading home now? Asher let out a dry scoff. Nope, heading to an internet cafe. Sure enough, Chloe's eyes widened. The scene she had witnessed over the summer overnight flashed through her mind. The two of them locked eyes, and, as if Asher possessed mind-reading powers, his expression showed he knew exactly what she was thinking. But in the very next second, the girl lowered her eyes and told him softly, Actually, I'm not really trying to go home either. After saying this, Chloe looked up and bit her lips slightly. It was remarkably strange, but in the exact instant their eyes met, looking as though they had somehow caught a magical scent of a kindred spirit. At least, that was the case for Asher. He sensitively picked up on something, but chose not to pry, merely offering a faint smile. With the library empty for the night, he asked, Do you have somewhere to go? Chloe nodded. I'm going to my cousin's house. Her heart was pounding wildly for some unknown reason, and though she knew it was impolite, she still couldn't resist asking him, Why don't you want to go home? Asher looked at her meaningfully for a few seconds, staring so intently that Chloe started to feel a bit hair-raisingly nervous. The corners of the boy's mouth slowly curled up, into an expression that was hard to define as a sneer or a bitter smile. Haven't you already seen why? He deflected the question masterfully, turning the awkwardness straight back onto Chloe. Chloe bit her lip. It felt as though witnessing someone else's humiliation made her feel even more embarrassed than the actual person involved. As they walked out of the library together, dusk was settling beautifully. A cool breeze swept through the early autumn evening, and framed between the towering skyscrapers, a blood-red sunset was slowly sinking down, looking like a perfectly round orange-red rose. Everyone had somewhere they needed to be, scattering like migrating birds. Chloe gripped her backpack straps tightly. She had to do something. This day was drawing to a close, and this chance encounter felt like an unexpected gift in her life. Whenever she got nervous, she wanted to tie her shoelaces, but she forced the urge down completely, trembling ever so slightly. She said to Asher, Asher, can I ask you about a problem? I couldn't figure out the last big question on the practice exam. She quickly looked away the moment the words left her mouth. She knew this request was abrupt and unreasonable. What were you doing earlier? You wait until someone's about to leave to speak up. Sure enough, Asher hesitated for a moment, before ultimately saying, Fine. The crowd dispersed rapidly, leaving no one lingering behind. The boy acted completely casual. He tossed his backpack aside and sat on the steps. Seeing this, Chloe hurriedly pulled out her practice exam and a pen. Her hands couldn't stop shaking, and the pen rolled far away. It was Asher who picked it up for her. She thought the ground was quite dirty, but she couldn't care less about that anymore, and sat down right next to him. Not too close, but not too far. Chloe felt like even breathing had become a luxury. You don't even know how to do something this simple? Asher chuckled, taking the pen from her hand. He rested a book on his knees to prop up the exam paper, and Chloe nodded in embarrassment. He was indeed a rather impatient person, writing in a wild, cursive scrawl. Soon, on the diary page she was using as scratch paper, he finished writing out the steps to solve the problem. He spoke very fast, and when he was done he asked her, "Got it?" It would be a miracle if she actually understood. But it didn't matter. His handwriting was now left in her diary. When he handed back the pen, the warmth of his fingers still lingered on it. Chloe deeply resented the passage of time, knowing that this warmth would completely vanish in a matter of seconds. In this world, she only possessed these few seconds, so she gripped the pen tightly, holding on to it so futilely, telling Asher she understood. "Your grades are really amazing." Chloe made small talk, offering a compliment that wasn't exactly original. Then, pretending to act casual, she said to herself, "You'll definitely get into a top-tier Ivy League school like Harvard or Yale, right? I'm going abroad." Mentioning the future, Okka had a look on his face that Chloe couldn't quite decipher. The setting sun flushed half of his face, with an unfamiliar, vibrant intensity. "You're not going to college in the country?" Chloe's heart suddenly felt like an airplane in a rapid nosedive, even though she knew this chosen child of heaven in front of her had nothing to do with her no matter where he studied. The moment he said he was going abroad, Chloe still really wanted to cry. It felt as though once those words were spoken, they were separated by vast mountains and oceans, and they would never see each other again in this lifetime. She didn't know how to respond to Asher, mumbling for a long time before saying, "That's really nice. I'm off." Asher patted down his clothes, swung his bag over his shoulder, and gave Chloe a brief nod. "Goodbye." Chloe stayed put, offering a shy smile. "Goodbye. You're still not leaving?" Asher was a bit surprised that she was staying in the exact same spot. He raised an eyebrow, looking at her. The girl's delicate complexion stood out. It was a crystal-clear, translucent fair skin, like layers of white clouds. The boy suddenly realized that a girl could actually have such fair skin. He used to think all girls shared the exact same face and looked identical. "I'll leave after the moon rises," Chloe replied softly, her thoughts delicate and impossible to articulate. Asher found the way she spoke quite interesting. The moon rises? He had never paid attention to any moon. To him, the Mid-Autumn Festival was just a repetition of yesterday and a preview of tomorrow, without anything special about it. The boy's thoughtful expression only lasted for a few seconds. He nodded and quickly vanished into the crowd. Originally, this meeting was just a chance encounter, and a single chance encounter didn't mean they were close now. Chloe thought randomly to herself as she watched Asher's retreating figure. The evening breeze picked up, feeling cool against her skin. Chloe silently realized that standing here alone waiting for the moon to rise was incredibly lonely, leaving her heart completely hollow. Even though tonight was meant for celebrating the festival with her grandparents, she believed that when she saw the full moon rise, she would still feel this kind of loneliness. An unprecedented, novel, and completely foreign world made her feel utterly alone. Once the Mid-Autumn Festival passed, the very first thing Chloe did upon returning to school was buy stationery. There are many small shops near the school gates, and the girls loved gathering in groups of 3 or 5 to rummage through celebrity posters, stickers, and pick out beautiful diaries and stationery. Aside from this, Jenna was also deeply obsessed with taking photo booth stickers. She dragged Chloe into a cramped photo booth, choosing colorful frame templates, and then pouting and making peace signs, being as dramatic as possible. Chloe couldn't bring herself to make those faces, and Jenna would constantly complain that she was as stiff as a wooden block. As for the stationery, it was a bit too flashy. Chloe chose a rather plain notebook, while Jenna had already picked out the photo booth sticker she thought was prettiest, selecting it carefully to send out along with the love letter. "Look, this one looks good on me, right? My nose looks pretty sharp." Jenna looked at her photo sticker with absolute vanity. She urged Chloe, "Hurry up, the National Day holiday break is just around the corner." From behind, Dylan poked his head out and said mischievously, "I heard everything. You guys are writing love letters." Chloe's face instantly turned bright red. Jenna reached out and gave him a heavy punch. Dylan tilted his head to dodge, laughing non-stop, and staring at Jenna he said, "Let me tell you, The number of fangirls infatuated with Asher is probably to the nth power. So stop wasting your time on a futile effort. Like it's any of your business. I want to pursue him, so deal with it. Jenna was always completely unreserved when talking to guys, but if she ran into someone handsome, she would tone it down slightly, trying her best to act like a lady, so she wouldn't scare them off. Do you really think you can compete with Mackenzie? Dylan gossiped just like a schoolgirl, deliberately lowering his voice. As he glanced over toward the academic rep Mackenzie's desk, even Mackenzie hasn't managed to get Asher. Her grades are incredible, and her family is totally loaded. She's not drop-dead gorgeous, but she definitely has a unique charm. Jenna stared at Dylan in utter shock. She's pursuing Asher too? How did you find out? There's nothing at Mayfield High that escapes my knowledge. Keep bragging. Chloe listened to their bickering in silence, her limbs going stiff, but she masked it perfectly. Turning around, she acted as if she had absolutely no interest in this gossip, and buried her head back into her book. Yet she suddenly and clearly realized that she too possessed a dark, hidden side. If someone as outstanding as Mackenzie couldn't even get him, then he must have exceptionally high standards. This was actually a good thing. Everyone was merely harboring a secret crush on him. Chloe was thoroughly startled by her own petty, secretive thoughts. She felt like she was being petty, as if she couldn't bear to see anyone else succeed. She wrote 2 drafts for the first letter, but ultimately didn't write anything out of the ordinary. Jenna looked a bit disappointed when she read it. She said, "Chloe, what you wrote is as bland as plain water. Asher won't be able to feel my burning heart at all, let alone these emotions that feel like a volcanic eruption." Chloe knew that Jenna was mostly doing this for fun. She was always loud and boisterous, constantly blabbing about whoever she liked at the moment. Around the campus, she could fall in love at first sight just by looking at someone's back. But her interest usually faded within minutes, and she never felt embarrassed when rejected. Laughing it off just the same. For the first time, it shouldn't be too intense, right? If we write it the way you want, I think it would be way too over the top. Chloe analyzed it for her quite seriously. She also knew that Jenna was just talking big. She wasn't actually that invested. After all, once Jenna came back from the holiday break, her enthusiasm had visibly begun to dwindle. If Chloe hadn't brought it up again, Jenna would have quickly forgotten all about her plan to pursue Asher. Chloe had her own little selfish motive here, but she didn't dare to dwell on it too much. This whole ordeal, rather than being a love letter, felt more like talking to herself. The teacher had already notified everyone that their first monthly exam would take place right after the break, so everyone would undoubtedly be studying hard during the vacation, even though they'd mouth off, saying, "I only played around," and didn't really review. You could absolutely never believe them. Dylan reminded Jenna that she needed to be prepared for the letter to fall on deaf ears. There were rumors that Asher didn't even look at the love letters he received, and just tossed them all straight into the trash. The trash can was filled with nothing but the shattered hearts of young girls. It didn't matter. That was Chloe's very first reaction. She had long since braced herself for the most pessimistic outcome. But since Dylan already knew, Jenna just ended up troubling Dylan to deliver the letter. The moment he returned, she excitedly yanked on the boy's sleeve and asked, "How did it go?" "How did it go?" He didn't have any reaction at all, not a single word. "Did he say? Did you see him toss it in the trash?" "No, he just went into the classroom. But whether he did later when no one was looking, I wouldn't know." Chloe carefully listened to the conversation, her emotions surging up and down, yet her face maintained a perfectly calm expression. Holding a rag, she quietly wiped the desk until it was sparkling clean. The school liked planting Chinese roses. Pink ones, yellow ones, and white ones. Only the bright red ones looked like clusters of fireworks burned into her eyes, like a certain dazzling person who was always filled with brilliant radiance. Before the break, Mr. Miller stood there emphasizing the monthly exam after the holiday. After finishing, he let everyone do self-study. For some reason, someone started a conversation, saying that you didn't even need to take the test to know. The top rank would either be Asher or Mackenzie. The two of them had graduated from the best middle school, and had tested in with the highest entrance exam scores. Mackenzie was clearly used to this kind of talk. She humbly shook her head. Mayfield High is full of hidden talents. It's not set in stone. Her middle school was excellent, and many of them had tested into Mayfield High. So there were always old classmates in the class. Since they knew each other well, they spoke very casually. It was truly strange. Chloe hadn't paid much attention to Mackenzie before, but ever since hearing those few words from Dylan, for some completely inexplicable reason, she couldn't help but look at how Mackenzie dressed, observing her expressions and tone when she spoke, and constantly seeing her actively participate in class activities. She was cheerful, enthusiastic, and generous. All of this gave Chloe a subtle, inexplicable sense of inferiority. Sigh, even if Asher gets first, it doesn't matter. He's going abroad anyway. To put it bluntly, he won't be taking up a competitive spot, a boy said meaningfully. Mackenzie offered a small smile, as if in agreement. Chloe heard it loud and clear. So there were other people who knew he was going abroad. She had originally thought no one knew, and had fiercely guarded it as a secret, resolved never to casually speak of it to anyone, even though Asher hadn't asked her to. Once again, an indescribable wave of disappointment washed over her heart as everyone casually chatted and laughed about Asher. She couldn't help but think that their chance encounter had given her something unique, like his warmth, or his plans to go abroad. But in reality, it hadn't. Everything about him could always be openly discussed by anyone at Mayfield High. On the last day before the holiday, she didn't receive a reply from Asher. Of course there wouldn't be one. But the sunset on this day was exceptionally beautiful. The world felt vast and open. Chloe stood alone in the hallway outside the classroom, staring blankly at the glowing sunset for a long time, before finally heading home. During the October holiday break, Asher twisted his ankle playing basketball. That letter was opened out of pure boredom while he was lying on the balcony at dusk. He had received countless letters, and usually just tossed them aside carelessly, or held absolutely no interest in this kind of high school puppy love. He didn't have a girl he liked. He never had. Growing up, the pure drama in his life was already enough of a headache. He didn't see the point in liking someone. If there was any coincidence, it had to be this exact moment. The sunset's glow was soft, falling over him like a pair of affectionate hands. He opened the first letter. The girl's handwriting looked like an elementary schooler's. Overly neat. Asher's first impression was quite poor. He knitted his brows imperceptibly. Hope this letter finds you well. I know this letter might disturb you, but I still couldn't resist writing it. I suppose this is likely just one of the many letters you receive, completely ordinary. Therefore, if these written words could actually be seen by you, I'd already be incredibly lucky. If you do happen to open this letter, I don't know when it will be. I also don't know how this piece of paper will turn over beneath your fingertips, or what you will feel the exact instance these words catch your eye. You might feel absolutely nothing at all, but I want to tell you that I am writing this letter at night. I love the night the most. Many of the other girls are afraid of the dark, but I'm not. The silent, peaceful nights actually makes me feel exceptionally safe, especially when I have things on my mind. The dark feels like a barrier that can shut out all the noise and distractions. I can just think quietly by myself, and no one will ever know. So I chose to pick up my pen at my absolute favorite time. I wonder what your favorite time of day is. It's autumn right now. I wonder if you've ever noticed, but if you look southeast from the hallway outside the classroom, you can see the plane trees near the library. Its leaves have already started turning yellow, and they will definitely be completely bare come winter, looking like an old monk with a smooth, heavy skull. Honestly, the mere thought that the few scenic spots at schools might have also captured your gaze makes me incredibly happy. It feels as though you gave them a brand new soul and body. Does that sound a bit too over the top? Of course, it's not entirely like that. Even if you've never paid attention to them, I still really love the environment at Mayfield High. I feel like I've written a whole lot of nonsense, boring and childish things. I hope a genius like you won't mind. I wanted to stay up all night writing this nonsense to you, but that's impossible, because I have to study too, and prepare for college admissions. I believe you are doing the same. If I may be so bold as to ask, what is your dream college? I want to go to Beijing to study. With my grades, naturally I won't get into a top-tier university. I suppose I am probably the only person who wants to go to Beijing to studies, just because of Mr. Yu Dafu's essay on the lonely autumn. It's completely fine if you don't answer any of these questions. Just knowing you read the letter makes me happy enough. If this letter happens to get thrown away, and someone else picks it up and reads it, I think I would die of embarrassment. No matter who reads this letter, please don't mock me too much. Thank you, sigh. Outside the window, stray cats are crying out one after another. I saw them during the day, sisters, aunts. Their eyes were dark and shiny, staring at me for a moment before turning and silently walking away. My grandmother often helps them out with our leftovers. I wanted to write a beautiful, poetic ending, but unfortunately, I got interrupted by the stray cats. I'll just stop here. Best wishes. It ended so abruptly. What kind of writing is this? Asher knitted his brows tightly as he read it. Are girls' love letters usually like this? It wasn't like he had never opened one before, but they didn't seem to be like this. But he had to admit, he had actually patiently read the entire thing. Perhaps, maybe, it was purely because someone else liked the night just as much as he did. Only then did Asher notice there was no salutation at the beginning, and no signature at the end. In other words, if this letter hadn't been delivered directly into his hands, it could have been meant for anyone. When the boy from the class next door handed him the letter back then, he hadn't paid attention to the girl's name at all. No matter how he tried to recall it now, it was just a faint, blurry voice. But that didn't matter. Asher knew this kind of behavior would eventually stop. The only difference was how long it would take. He wouldn't write back, and he didn't have much interest in knowing who liked him. Especially someone with such terrible handwriting. Asher didn't know how he had found the patience to read through it. Whiny. He folded the letter neatly and tossed it into the balcony locker. Osmanthus trees were planted around the neighborhood, releasing wave after wave of a rich fragrance, carried over by the wind like a surging tide. The boy suspected that every neighborhood had these pungent flowers. He stood up and shut the window. The holiday was very long, and the city library was packed with people every day. Chloe came for several days in a row, but never saw the figure she was hoping to see. She returned home in disappointment, and even the meals her grandmother cooked lost their flavor. With a pile of books and study materials on her desk, she worked through them problem by problem, endlessly. Chloe would occasionally look out the window and daze off for a bit. The moment she remembered that she had actually written that kind of letter to Asher, Chloe instantly felt completely mortified. Turning around to plunge onto her bed and cover her head with a pillow. She stayed in that oxygen-deprived state for 10 seconds, before tossing the pillow aside. Every breath she took came with the loud thumping of her heart. Chloe couldn't help rolling around on the bed. It was so embarrassing. Why did she write it like that? The thing was, the more she dwelled on it, the more awkward she felt. But the girl also knew clearly that she would probably do it again. Just then, her grandmother knocked on the door from outside. Chloe bounded up from the bed and quickly smoothed out her clothes. When the door opened, her grandmother's smiling face appeared before her. "Sweetheart, downstairs, Mrs. Lee gave you a bookstore gift card that you can use to buy books. Here you go." Chloe's eyes lit up. She could buy books again, and, in a way, they were free. She didn't like taking advantage of others. But since Mrs. Lee had given her the gift card, she was still exceptionally happy. "Your mother," the elderly woman looked at her reaction, subconsciously blurting out half a sentence, before suddenly realizing it was wrong, and abruptly cutting herself off. Looking at her grandmother's dodging gaze, Chloe felt something surge straight to her chest, churning and swelling inside. She almost blurted out a question, but once again, she didn't. She didn't say a single thing, merely offering a sweet smile, as if she hadn't heard a word. "I'll give Mrs. Lee one of my small potted plants." As a return gift, those were flower saplings her grandfather brought back from the countryside over the summer, and Chloe had grown them into several pots that looked full of life. By the time the holiday ended, Chloe still hadn't run into Asher at the city library. However, during the last 2 days, she unexpectedly ran into some of her other classmates. Everyone started chatting, talking about their college aspirations, and mentioning which wealthy classmates might be going abroad. Among them, Asher's name was brought up out of the blue. Chloe was like a quiet little bug, listening silently, but what she secretly regretted in her heart was why she hadn't asked him that day, which country he was planning to go to, and which university he would attend. On the afternoon of the final day of the National Day break, the students returned to school one after another. Even during evening study hall, the room was still chaotic and noisy. Everyone needed to vent the gossip they had bottled up over the days. It seemed that letter had simply fizzled out into nothing. When Chloe walked past Class 1, she quickly swept a glance inside out of the corner of her eye. Unfortunately, it was too fast. Aside from the shifting shadows of Class 1 students, she couldn't see anything at all. The next day, During Monday's flag-raising ceremony, Asura was nowhere to be seen, which was completely unprecedented. Chloe widened her eyes and checked several times, but he still wasn't there. This was truly strange. He was the flag-bearer. So, how could he miss Monday? He hadn't shown up at the library during the entire holiday either. Was he sick, or had he gotten into another fight? Driven by these anxious thoughts, even the most well-behaved, rule-abiding girl could conjure up a surge of mysterious courage. Chloe hesitated for a few seconds, before quietly tugging on Mackenzie, who was standing in front of her. My stomach hurts. Can you tell Mr. Miller later that I went to the restroom first? Heaven knew that even she, Chloe, had learned to lie. Her face was bright red, and her heart was racing. Karma must have been punishing her, because right after she ran out, her stomach actually started to ache faintly. Chloe was shocked that the punishment had come so quickly, feeling exceptionally frustrated, and had no choice but to head toward the restrooms. In fact, there were restrooms on every floor of the school building, but near the ginkgo grove to the left of the smaller school building, there was also a massive public restroom. Sometimes, if people didn't want to wait around for the busy floor restrooms, they would come down here. The sunlight was dappling through the grove of trees, and Chloe suddenly spotted a figure standing right there, blatantly smoking a cigarette. Having not seen him for the whole holiday, she wondered if it was just her imagination, but he seemed to have grown taller again. He inexplicably reminded her of the kind of trees found in a primeval forest, or some unknown plant hidden beneath the canopy, shooting upward without hesitation the moment it caught a ray of sunlight, never missing a single chance to grow. The boy noticed her too, showing no expression at first, looking rather fierce and intimidating. For some reason, the way he looked made Chloe find it novel and amusing. She really couldn't resist letting the corners of her mouth curve up. This guy skipped the flag-raising ceremony just to hide out here and sneak a smoke. Why did he always act like such a bad boy? As if catching her faint, subtle smile, Asher greeted her, calling her by her name. Chloe pretended to look perfectly composed, and gave a small nod, asking as if completely casual, "You didn't go to the flag-raising?" It seemed she had even forgotten all about her stomachache. Asher merely smiled, using his index finger and thumb to hold the cigarette as he took a couple of deep drags. He said, "What a coincidence, you catch me every single time. Don't go snitching on me to the dean. Or watch out, I'll beat you up." Listen to that. Are those words that should come out of a top student's mouth? Chloe wanted to act more natural, but then she remembered that letter. That sensation felt exactly as if Asher had suddenly caught her naked. Even though he didn't know she was the one who wrote it, she still felt intensely self-conscious. It was just too embarrassing. Blushing furiously, she froze for a moment, before squeezing out a reply, "I don't like gossiping about people." With the remaining words, she really wanted to urge him not to get into fights, and not to copy adults by smoking. But looking at his rebellious and indifferent demeanor, Chloe, for the first time, truly understood what it meant to find all words completely unnecessary. The monthly exams at Mayfield High were always taken very seriously, mostly held over the weekend. It was one person per desk, with 30 people seated in each classroom, arranged in a standard grid layout. The desks had to be turned around, with exam numbers taped to them. The students had to empty out everything inside their desks, with everything operating strictly according to SAT standards. So, moving all those books was a major hassle every single time. However, starting this year, lockers had been installed at the end of the hallway, providing one for each person. Before the monthly exam, the space in front of the lockers was packed with people, with students from every class on the floor gathering there. "Hey, how are your preparations going?" Mackenzie asked quite naturally, addressing Asher. The boy was currently bending over to stash his books inside. He had the fewest belongings, not even enough to fill a single locker. Same old? The girl's competitive drive against him had always been exceptionally strong. Sometimes she really did edge him out. Asher never took it to heart. Seeing that Mackenzie's locker was stuffed full, with a bunch of things still left out, he pointed at his own locker and said, "You can put them in here." "Awesome, thanks." Mackenzie handed the things over without any hesitation. Asher frowned. "You girls are such a hassle. What even is all this?" He took a black plastic bag. "Not telling you," Mackenzie said, her tone suddenly shifting to a very soft, girlish vibe. Asher was used to her acting like a wise older sister, and gave her a deep look. It was quite sharp, making Mackenzie feel a bit self-conscious as she said, "Why are you staring at me like that? You sounded weird just now." Asher stated bluntly. Inside the black plastic bag were pads, tissues, and other supplies. A girl's secrets. Mackenzie shrugged helplessly, saying, "You really don't understand a girl's mind at all." Asher had absolutely no interest in this topic, and didn't even reply. Why should he understand a girl's mind? From a distance, the two of them looked very close. Chloe was originally going to bring her books over this way. But seeing this scene, she couldn't help but slow her steps. Wind rushed in through the window, wave after wave, pouring a chilly sensation straight into her heart. The girl couldn't help but hug the books tight against her chest, silently watching the two top students, talking with complete ease. Mackenzie was always so confident, flashing her neat white teeth, and she dared to look directly into Asher's eyes. Asher seemed to be incredibly close with her, Chloe felt, somewhere deep in her heart, tiny, sour, and bitter bubbles welling up. If only I had grades as amazing as Mackenzie's. How wonderful that would be. That way, the level of their conversations might feel a bit more equal. She waited until the two of them finally left, before she stepped forward. After standing still, she quietly stole a glance at Asher's locker. His handwritten name was taped onto it, written in his penmanship, the exact same as on that scratch paper. She had almost wanted to frame the math problem she asked him last time. The girl stared at the name Asher, a slightly melancholic expression on her face. In reality, it was just a name, but it already felt a vast world away. The letter that would never get a reply had rushed back to her mind the instant she ran into him, making her so embarrassed she wanted to die. But right now, it had clearly transformed into a completely different feeling. This is how it has to be. If it weren't like this, even if he did reply, I wouldn't have the courage to admit that I'm the one who likes him. But I can see his name on the locker, and I've spoken to him. Barring any surprises, I can see him at the Monday flag raising too. I've walked the same path as him, seen the exact same scenery, and maybe even looked up at the exact same corner of the sky. Chloe thought of this with a warm but weary comfort, and forced herself to cheer up. This monthly exam wasn't just stressful for the students. The teachers were also eager to gauge everyone's progress. In the classroom, Mackenzie was carefully taping up the exam seating chart. The moment she finished, a crowd of people swarmed over with a loud rush. Jenna was shouting from inside, "Stop pushing, you're crushing me." In reality, she was squeezing harder than anyone else. Dylan was also very tall, and had already spotted the chart, and began mischievously flicking Jenna's broad forehead. It made a rather crisp thud. He said, "Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. What are you still squeezing for? You're testing in our own classroom, not with Asher. Give it up." Jenna clutched her forehead, absolutely furious. "Are you annoying or what? Hey, you're in the same room as me. Jenna, we're actually sitting right in front of and behind each other. I think we're fated to be together." Dylan was truly being a total pain. So Jenna kept chasing him around to hit him, yelling, "Go die. Dylan, go eat crap in outer space." Everyone burst into laughter at that. It seemed like girls liking Asher was an incredibly common thing. So common that anyone could recklessly and blatantly shout it out loud. After all, liking the most outstanding and handsome boy was completely natural, nothing to be ashamed of. But for Chloe, it wasn't like that. He was an unspoken secret, a solitary waiting meant for her alone. Maybe I am an ordinary person, falling for someone everyone else loves too. Chloe wished so much that she could bring herself to notice other boys. He wasn't that smart, and wasn't that special, but he was a very cute and interesting boy. No, she was still grateful to have met Asher. He could make a heart feel exceptionally alive, and he could make all of Mayfield High full of vibrant colors. Because he was there, all the grueling studying became fulfilling and happy, and all the imperfections became complete. With a sharp rip, Chloe snapped back to reality. It turned out that Jenna had ripped the zipper on Dylan's school uniform jacket. Broken, both of them froze. Jenna, completely in the wrong but acting fully justified, blurted out first, "Who told you to be so annoying?" Dylan clearly didn't take it seriously. "You're so fierce. You won't be able to find a boyfriend in the future. Like it's any of your business. It's not your place to worry. You piece of crap." The two of them were total frenemies, never spending a single day without bickering. Chloe told Dylan, "My grandmother knows how to sew, so give it to me. I'll have her fix it up and give it back to you." Look at Chloe compared to you. Dylan loved saying this phrase the most. Jenna jumped up again to smack his shoulder. For this monthly exam, Chloe was assigned to Class 5. In the exam hallway, some people were chatting, while others were flipping through books. She silently walked up to the railing, resting her book on top, and spent a moment memorizing classical poetry and prose. Later, the teacher told everyone to use the restroom and enter the classrooms. The exam room was a complete mix-up. Many people were from other classes, and Chloe didn't know them at all. After returning from the restroom, the boy sitting in front of her turned around and asked how her grades were. The boy was the kind of recruited slacker student. There were very few students who just coasted along at Mayfield High, and this boy happened to be one of them. Chloe shook her head in embarrassment. "I'm just average. Let me copy off you during the exam," the boy said dismissively. There was a bottle of a drink at the corner of the desk, which he casually shoved toward her. "Don't cover your exam paper. I'll just turn my head and take a quick look. Oh, by the way, pass me the multiple choice answers for the English exam later. I'll buy you dinner." Then why are you even attending school? Chloe thought to herself. Isn't this just cheating yourself? Who are you going to copy from on the actual SATs? Just as she was about to refuse him, she noticed the boy's gaze had already shifted away from her, staring at something else. Following his gaze, she looked over in that direction too, and Chloe's heart instantly began pounding wildly. That figure was vividly reflected in her trembling pupils. It was Asher. He was actually in this exam room too. The boy looked completely effortless, bringing along only a single pen, carrying absolutely nothing else. Arriving fashionably late, he sat right in the empty seat behind Chloe, stretching his two long legs casually out into the aisle. It took Chloe a good while to finally process that Asher's exam number was right next to hers. Before she could think further, she was lightly nudged by the boy in front of her. "Hey, swap seats with me." Of course, Chloe couldn't agree. While part of it was certainly because of Asher, it was mostly because it was against the rules. Swapping seats randomly. She knew exactly what the boy was plotting. The boy smiled. "Come on, don't be so rigid. If you don't say anything, the proctor won't even know. Everyone's completely mixed up anyway. Who's the teacher going to recognize?" Still, no, this isn't right. Chloe remained firm. The boy looked completely exasperated, as if wanting to complain about her. But there was nothing he could do. Fortunately, she sat back down properly. Behind her, Asher didn't hear a thing. He had walked in wearing headphones. Sitting down, he mindlessly twirled his pen out of boredom. Completely indifferent to everything around him, he didn't pay any attention at all to who was sitting in front, behind, or next to him. But many people stole glances in his direction, whispering his name in low voices. The teacher walked into the classroom with the exam papers, and behind her, Asher didn't greet her. Chloe knew he hadn't noticed her at all. For every subject, Asher would leave the moment he finished writing. The exam papers were blown gently by the wind, rustling softly. The proctor walked over, and used a chalkboard eraser to weight his exam paper down. The boy's crisp scent of orchids drifted past for a fleeting moment. Every time, Chloe would look up to watch his figure, silently staring at him, which was probably the only thing she could do. But this was already enough, and she didn't even want the monthly exam to end. Until the physics exam, Asher suddenly realized the girl in front of him was Chloe. He greeted her, completely casually, as if he hadn't noticed before. "Oh, it turns out you're sitting in front of me." "Yeah, you never noticed me," Chloe thought silently. The instant their eyes locked still sent a wave of panic through her, as if staying like that for just a few seconds longer would expose that passionate, yet helpless secret hidden in her heart. Her gaze darted away nervously. "You're in this exam room too?" Chloe did her absolute best to make a face that looked like she had just found out about it too. The corner of Asher's mouth curled up slightly. This tiny gesture gave Chloe a sliver of encouragement, and she asked, pretending to sound completely natural, "You must have done pretty well on the exams, right?" "Pretty well," he said, not being modest at all. But when those words came out of his mouth, it didn't sound arrogant or boastful. Asher said it as if he were answering, "Have you eaten?" "Yeah, I ate," completely matter-of-factly. This, instead, left Chloe completely unsure of what to say next. She offered a reserved smile, and seeing that he had no intention of continuing the conversation, she slowly turned her body back around in awkwardness. But her heart was still thumping wildly against her chest like a sledgehammer. Once the exam papers were handed out, the classroom fell dead silent. But clearly her science skills weren't as strong as her humanities skills. Chloe's brow knitted together unconsciously. She wore her long hair dark and smooth, thickly cascading over her shoulders. The sunlight outlined the girl's entire head, framing it in a soft, fuzzy, and exceptionally gentle halo. Asher looked up and saw her slender shoulders, her cascading long hair, and under the baggy school uniform, the faint silhouette of her bra. For some reason, he could clearly make out that shape. Feeling an inexplicable wave of self-consciousness, and instantly snapped his gaze back. Asher didn't understand girls, but there were certain things he did know. The eternal theme of the boys' dorm was talking about girls. Even if he had no interest in listening, a few words would still catch his ear. The most distracting thing was, late at night when he heard the others talking nonsense, he would feel a faint surge of restlessness. The omnipresent hormones of puberty were playing tricks on him. He wasn't immune to it either. To be exact, at certain moments his legs were just too long, and no matter how he positioned them, he couldn't get comfortable. So he simply stretched them lazily forward. Out of the corner of her eye, Chloe's gaze caught his sneakers completely without warning. They were black canvas, with snow-white laces. Asher was truly a strange contradiction. Sometimes he looked exceptionally neat and clean. Sometimes he gave off the impression that he didn't care at all. During one flag-raising ceremony, his sneakers were clearly covered in dirt. These stray, messy thoughts gave Chloe a little start. She forced herself to avert her gaze, refocusing her attention onto the exam questions. But the classroom was too quiet, so quiet that she could hear the scratch of his pen on the paper. The exact moment he stopped writing, and even when he stood up to leave, the crisp, dry scent that drifted off his body, because someone went to the restroom halfway through, and on their way back, they happened to cross paths with Asher. As they stepped aside for each other, due to the other person being exceptionally tall and broad, it forced Asher's hand to rest and lean against the corner of her desk for support. His knuckles were sharp and defined, the blue veins looking like a winding river. Chloe's thoughts were instantly jolted awake, and she watched this scene practically holding her breath. Asher had pressed his hand right onto her pencil case. There was a small charm attached to the pencil case, a cute Tweety bird. His palm landed perfectly right on top of it, getting dug into by the little bird's shape. He frowned and offered a faint smile, shaking his hand, and only then did Chloe look up as if waking from a deep dream. The boy was already walking toward the door. After the dismissal bell rang, Chloe ran out and looked around. Asher was leaning against the hallway railing all by himself, gazing into the distance. His body was leaning forward, and, as usual, headphones were hanging over his ears. There wasn't a single soul beside him. Chloe felt like her own brain had completely short-circuited. A teenage girl's thoughts were utterly baffling. She desperately wanted to walk up to him and ask, "Did my Tweety bird charm hurt your hand?" But these were words that didn't really need to be said. It was far too insignificant. So insignificant that asking it would just sound like forced small talk. It was all just her forcing a connection. Chloe stood frozen on the spot, hesitating, standing not far from him, yet feeling exceptionally distant, as if Asher had picked up on something, or perhaps completely by accident. He turned his head and spotted Chloe. The girl instantly clutched her shirt hem tightly, her eyes fluttering, like a panicked little snake, that instantly slipped and hid away deep into the thick grass. She turned around and bolted back into the exam room. A week later, the monthly exam results for all 9 subjects were released. That day, a cold front happened to sweep in, making everyone's skin instantly tighten up and feel completely dry. Chloe had always been exceptionally sensitive to changes in the weather. The arrival of early autumn had felt lingering and gradual. Then this time it had truly turned freezing overnight. Waiting for the scores felt like having a string of wind chimes hanging in her heart. Every time a teacher walked in, they would clink and rattle relentlessly. Practically every subject teacher would be interrogated by someone asking, "Has this subject been graded yet?" The class rankings were posted right next to the schedule, while the grade-wide rankings had to be checked on the main bulletin board. The class president and Mackenzie were in charge of putting up the sheets. A wave of commotion rippled through the classroom, and Chloe felt her heart instantly swell up, so large that her chest could barely contain it, as if it were about to burst right out. Every time she got nervous, her chest felt exceptionally uncomfortable. "Let me check for you. Hang on a sec." Jenna had a knack for throwing herself into any crowd to join the fun. She squeezed to the front and stood on her tiptoes. Hearing the people around her let out a collective gasp. Mackenzie is first. The class president is second. Wow. I wonder where our class's top score ranks across the whole grade. I already checked. Asher is first in the grade. Mackenzie, you're ranked 9th in the grade. Mackenzie shook her head. The monthly exams at Mayfield High were never easy, but she felt like her testing process had gone smoothly enough. Ultimately, landing at 9th place merely meant she hadn't bombed it, but it was still a bit short of her own goals. After all, she had entered Mayfield High with the second highest score overall. A genius doing poorly and an ordinary person doing poorly were completely different things. "You're 15th, and I'm 21st, Jenna said as she ran back. She patted her chest. "Not bad, not terrible. I thought I'd be at the absolute bottom." Haha, it was clear that Jenna was quite happy. Because she didn't really care about studying at all, coasting along and always slacking off to secretly read romance novels. Chloe was much more hard-working than her, who was always daydreaming. But she had to admit that Jenna was actually a very smart girl. Otherwise, she wouldn't have just taken the exam so carelessly, and still managed to land an average rank in the class. As for herself, ranking 15th in the class was a bit unexpected for her. She had thought she was only around 20th place level. With a total of just over 40 students in a class, heaven knew how much average students lacked a sense of presence to the teachers when they're par. Ents asked, the teachers used the exact same phrasing. The child can generally keep up with the curriculum, but isn't exactly outstanding either, and there is still room for improvement. A whole bunch of kids with blurry faces receiving the exact same evaluation word for word from the teacher. But if it was in the top 15, it was slightly different. Chloe was very happy in her heart. Her hard work hadn't gone to waste, and she wasn't that mediocre after all. Even the most introverted teenage girl had her own little pride, especially after Jenna told her that her literature score was even higher than Mackenzie's. Suppressing the smile at the corners of her mouth, Chloe told Jenna, "We shouldn't compare ourselves to others. Just compare ourselves to our past selves. I hope to improve next time too. Come on, let's go check the grade rankings." Jenna grabbed her hand and ran downstairs, with Dylan following them like a total parasite. He ranked 20th in the class this time, his total score being just 2 points higher than Jenna's. Just 2 points. Yet he acted incredibly smug, showing off right in front of Jenna. The crowd in front of the bulletin board wasn't as large as they imagined, with only a few stray figures drifting by. Without a doubt, Asher's name appeared conspicuously at the very top spot. Chloe looked up, excitement and bashfulness hidden deep in her heart. An occasion where she could openly and completely stare at Asher's name could actually happen so often. When she realized this, she felt like her mind was flooded with sunshine. The literature scores were always listed first, and she saw her score, 101, which was 1 point higher than Asher's 140. This was the only place where she had bested him. Chloe's mind buzzed as a wave of heat rushed through her body. She knew she was just too incredibly happy. She didn't realistically think she could catch up to Asher, but just being able to stand side by side on this single metric made it feel as though the distance between them had been closed slightly, even if it was only the case in her own eyes. During the summer, the cicadas outside the window would buzz nonstop, making the whole street and the entire city burn with sweltering heat. Chloe now felt a sweltering heat inside, as if a fragment of the sun had fallen into her heart, blazing and scalding, making the freezing cold air completely vanish from her reality. On this day, Class 2's literature class was scheduled after Class 1's, so Chloe's literature exam paper was borrowed by Class 1's teacher first. Class 1 possessed a reserved pride. They accounted for 20 of the top 100 students in the entire grade. It was quite impressive, considering there were 18 freshman classes in total. Asher lost points on the literature section. Unfortunately, he rarely memorized materials. The poetry and classical prose he learned relied entirely on a quick study at the time. If he remembered them, and if he didn't, he wouldn't obsess over them like other students. The teacher, looking thoroughly helpless, kept saying to him, "Literature is the only subject where you aren't number 1. You could have easily scored higher than Chloe from Class 2. He didn't take it to heart at all. The highest literature score for this monthly exam belonged to Class 2. Chloe's teacher shook the exam paper in hand, staring at the elegant, pleasing handwriting. "I tell you all the time to practice good penmanship. Practice good penmanship. But some students just won't listen. How do you think the graders feel when they look at your chicken scratch handwriting? What do you think their impression is? Take them out and execute them." Someone fearless chimed in from below, and the whole class burst out into a roar of laughter. Asher also followed suit with a silent smile. He had practiced calligraphy, and his handwriting was very powerful and sharp. The literature teacher undoubtedly appreciated his penmanship, but disapproved of the top student's dislike for memorization. Asher could be described as having an incredible memory. Even without liking memorization, he could still pull off high scores in the humanities subjects. If he actually cared to memorize things, then he would be absolutely perfect. As for the essay section this time, both Asher and Chloe received exceptionally high scores. But speaking strictly as your teacher, I personally prefer the writing style of Chloe from Class 2. The literature teacher deliberately shot a glance at Asher. Who knows if she wanted to take him down a peg, or perhaps hoped he wouldn't let it get to his head, making him understand that at least in literature, he wasn't entirely without a rival. Unfortunately, Asher was an exceptionally proud person. The years of domestic abuse from Richard had caused him to develop a very severe rebellious streak. He hated listening to people lecture him, and only tolerated it because he knew the teacher acted out of pure good intentions. The teacher began reading Chloe's essay aloud, and Asher sat below, listening to every single word without missing a beat. Inside the boy's eyes, a flurry of subtle emotions flashed by. After class ended, he asked the teacher for Chloe's exam paper. The teacher, assuming he was taking an interest, smiled meaningfully. The handwriting was very elegant, and the pages were pristine, looking very much like her character. Asher suddenly recalled the few moments they had crossed paths, her perfectly clean face, her pure expressions, and her soft, clear voice. Except she was incredibly easy to embarrass. He even remembered that some guys in the boys' dorm had mentioned the name Chloe. She undoubtedly possessed the kind of looks that a certain type of guy liked. Asher usually paid very little attention to whether others were attractive or not. He used to think all girls were pretty much the same. But Chloe was very fair, an exceptionally clean, pale, fair skin. Asher finally remembered that he had once been completely startled by how fair she was. He read the essay for a bit, and quickly handed the paper back to the teacher. The teacher was still joking. Not going to analyze it a bit more? To be exact, the news of the Class 1 teacher reading Chloe's essay aloud spread back to Class 2 before the recess break was even over. Out of nowhere, Chloe became a total heroine in everyone's eyes, because Class 1 was always making sarcastic remarks, claiming that when Class 2 did their cleaning duties, they left trash right in front of Class 1's door. Class 1 always complained that Class 2 lacked discipline and was too loud for them. Class 1 took the school drills more seriously, but Class 2 mocked them as a bunch of tryhards. Class 1 wore their school uniforms properly and absolutely despised the Class 2 boys trying to act cool by tying their uniform jackets around their waists. A massive pile of petty, trivial matters like that led to one conclusion. Class 1 had a massive superiority complex. We're all just parallel classes anyway. What do you have to be so smug about? Yet Chloe actually scored higher in literature than Asher. It felt like a total breath of sweet revenge. Even 1 point counts as higher. The class next door read your essay. Jenna leaned over the desk like a giant loudspeaker, nudging Chloe, who was focused on reading her book. You're famous now. Everyone knows by now that Asher couldn't beat you in literature. The guys in their class even said you're really pretty. Chloe immediately became intensely embarrassed. She pressed down on her book, but couldn't suppress her racing heart. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not talking nonsense. The Class 1 people said it themselves. They said Asher isn't taking it well, and grabbed your exam paper to read it. Jenna's voice was so loud it rattled her ears, sounding exactly like a frog chirping away after the rain. Chirping away non-stop. Chloe's heart suddenly felt like it forgot to beat for a split second. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but realized she had absolutely no idea what to say. Jenna seemed to have long forgotten all about that love letter business. Her howling about pursuing Asher also felt like something from the previous century. Like many other girls, her crush on Asher was real enough. He was just so special, so dazzling. It was only natural for anyone to fall for him, precisely because he was completely out of reach, and precisely because so many people admired him. It became something people didn't even feel the need to hide. And because of that, it wouldn't be embarrassing even if you failed. There was only one Asher, so it wasn't like he could say yes to everyone anyway. The world quieted down. Recess was incredibly noisy, but Chloe sat alone at her desk, with only one thought left in her mind. He got my exam paper. Literature was during the third period. Unsurprisingly, Chloe's exam paper was held tightly by the teacher, with no intention of returning it to her anytime soon. She had no choice but to share a copy with Jenna. The teacher said, "Chloe's exam paper tells us that, actually, getting a 140 on the literature section of the college entrance exam is not a dream. First of all, you can't get any multiple-choice questions wrong." The teacher enthusiastically started pumping up the students, but Chloe just kept staring at her exam paper. Which part of it had he touched? The warmth he left behind must have already vanished forever, just like with that pen in the library. But the sad thing was, she had actually felt the temperature of that pen, whereas a thin sheet of paper could only hold onto it for a few seconds. Any trace he left had already been overwritten by someone else. Perhaps by the teacher's hand, or perhaps by the other students' stacked papers. Chloe turned her head. Not far outside the window, the flowers in the small flower bed were starting to wither, gradually fading into an indistinguishable hue. She had copied down all the incorrect answers from this monthly exam, one by one, compiling them into a review notebook. Mr. Miller walked into the classroom to notify everyone to prepare to pay for the study materials fee. He assigned the task to 2 people. The boys would hand their money to the class president, and the girls would hand theirs to Mackenzie. Everyone was completely used to paying for materials fees. This amount of money, for most families, was practically nothing. Chloe was no exception. Her grandfather and grandmother both had pensions, so supporting just her was perfectly manageable. Her biggest expense was simply buying books. There was a bookstore near the school gates that frequently sold second-hand books. Chloe had discovered this bookstore entirely by chance and loved it. Since she did fairly well on this exam, she decided to reward herself with a trip to browse the bookstore. Compared to her, Jenna had a completely unscholarly demeanor. She read books too. Romance novels, entertainment magazines, and teen manga. In addition, she loved buying a whole bunch of colorful notebooks to copy down romantic song lyrics and cheesy melodramatic quotes. So, when Chloe asked if she wanted to go to the bookstore, she rejected her flat out. The sky grew dim, and a drizzling autumn rain began to fall, bringing waves of chilly air. Chloe held up her umbrella and headed to the bookstore all by herself. The lighting inside the bookstore was just as dim. The owner had long hair tied into a small bun. His 2 fingers were stained yellow from years of holding cigarettes. He looked quite young, but people said he was already in his mid-30s. His bookstore sold some rare second-hand books, and the covers of many books were completely faded. The shop also sold imported cutout CDs, which was quite trendy, so young people frequently patronized the place. It also drew in quite a few students from Mayfield High. The owner recognized Chloe and gave her a friendly nod. Chloe offered a shy nod in response. There were far too many books here. Upstairs was a small loft, and even the sides of the cramped staircase were piled high with books. If you searched through them carefully, you could actually dig up some rare, privately collected gems. The shop always smelled faintly of old mustiness, like a lingering rainy season trapped inside. Chloe could tell he didn't really like tidying up the messy clutter. If you weren't careful, you'd easily trip over a stack of books. After greeting her and chatting briefly, the owner trod up the creaking wooden stairs to the loft to search for her books. She thought she was the only customer in the shop right now, given the rain, but there was clearly a figure standing around the corner. Chloe wanted to squeeze past, but saw it was a middle-aged man. He wore a hat, making it hard to see his face, and he showed absolutely no intention of stepping aside. She glanced at him, then changed her mind and gave up, standing right where she was, to flip through a book catalog. Suddenly, a strange odor wafted over, impossible to quite identify. She looked up, only to find that the man, Juhad, somehow already stepped right up next to her. Standing so close, Chloe found it incredibly jarring, and, instinctively, recoiled from this invasion of her personal space. "Do you like Mr.'s big toy?" the man suddenly asked her with a low smirk, his hand fumbling around his waist. Chloe looked down out of pure blank instinct. An incredibly hideous, grotesque object instantly filled her vision. Chloe was still frozen in utter shock and naive confusion. She didn't even fully register what it was, only finding it terrifying and repulsive. "Do you want to touch it?" the man asked her. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming to the bookstore?" A familiar voice suddenly rang out. Before she could even snap out of it, a hand was already resting on her shoulder, pulling her back a little. Asher was actually in this bookstore too. His appearance was just as sudden, stepping directly between the girl and the man. Chloe was completely stunned. She didn't know what to think of any of it. She only knew that Asher had just casually draped his arm over her shoulder. His tone sounded so familiar, as if she were his girlfriend, exactly like one of those high school couples secretly dating, yet always on the verge of being caught by someone. Chloe stared at him stiffly, utterly at a loss. The man was clearly furious at Asher for ruining his fun, and shot the boy a vicious glare. The staircase creaked loudly once again. The owner was coming back down. Seeing this, the man hurried away. Asher immediately turned around and walked up to the owner, saying a few words to him, leaving Chloe standing there entirely alone, like she still hadn't woken up from a giant dream. The tips of her ears were burning uncomfortably hot. When Asher looked back over at her again, Chloe hurriedly averted her gaze, reaching out her hand to pretend she was looking for a book. The owner handed her the books she wanted. Asher had come to buy cut-out CDs. Would he age, intorted, then turned around to glance at Chloe, who was waiting behind him. Heading back to school? I have a few things I want to tell you. The boy spoke with absolute openness, but the owner cast a deeply meaningful glance over at Chloe. Chloe was worried he might misunderstand and think they were in a secret relationship. Her face was filled with pure embarrassment, and she remained silent as if a beat behind, only offering a nod. The two of them walked out one after the other, and the freezing wind and rain instantly slapped against their faces. Dusk was falling, and the distant horizon looked as if layers of dark storm clouds were stacking up. The streetlights had already flickered on. That creep was doing that, so why were you still staring at him? Asher twirled his umbrella handle slightly, looking completely baffled. He truly could not understand a girl's train of thought. Chloe still hadn't fully processed what had happened. She pursed her lips innocently, shaking her head. I didn't know what was going on, Asher told her firmly. That's called an exhibitionist. Stay far away from creepy perverts like that in the future. If you see something's off, don't try to confront him. Chloe hadn't even figured out what those 3 words meant. Seeing her expression, Asher said word for word, exhibitionist, exhibitionist. Your literature grades are pretty good, so it shouldn't be hard to understand, right? Sudden realization brought deep embarrassment. A mix of lingering fear and disgust churned violently within her chest. Chloe involuntarily gripped her umbrella handle tighter, clutching her books tightly against her chest with her other hand. She looked at Asher in utter disbelief, but I didn't actually see it very clearly. Her brain short-circuited, and she somehow blurted out that single sentence. Asher raised an eyebrow in surprise at first, and then suddenly burst into a rather unkind laugh. You actually wanted to see it clearly? What on earth are you thinking? The air was crisp and cool. The girl's face, which had been icy pale, instantly flushed bright red like a cooked shrimp as she realized her slip of the tongue. She bit her lip hard, completely at a loss for how to explain. Grown-ups come to this bookstore a lot, and it's a mixed crowd. Next time you come, it's best to bring a classmate along, Asher reminded her, glancing up at the sky. Let's head back. It's almost time for evening study hall. Thank you, Chloe finally remembered to say. Asher turned around as raindrops pattered against his umbrella, making his features look blurry and indistinct. She could only hear his crisp voice replying, no problem. Didn't you play the hero once back during the summer too? His voice carried a trace of teasing amusement. Hearing it felt exactly like catching a warm smile. She suddenly noticed that Asher's hair seemed to have grown quite a bit. He clearly had no intention of getting a haircut, looking wildly unkempt like a patch of overgrown grass. There were small puddles on the ground, reflecting the dim streetlights. Chloe accidentally stepped right into one, splashing water onto Asher's pants, though neither of them noticed at all. The familiar food stalls near the school gates were still open, steaming hot. In a hazy, thick mist, Asher turned around and spoke to Chloe, who had been stepping on his shadow behind him. Let me buy you a cup of porridge. You look like you're shivering out here. Chloe instantly became intensely embarrassed again. Since when am I shivering? Soon, a cup of hot porridge was handed to her, spreading warmth from her palms straight to her heart. The weather had suddenly turned freezing, yet Asher was only wearing a thin, long-sleeved shirt. It was as if he didn't feel the cold at all. Back during the summer break, those guys, Chloe's tongue felt stiff as she tried to force some small talk. Hearing this, Asher looked over at her. He shrugged indifferently. Oh, that incident? Didn't you give a statement to the police too? Those vocational high school bastards tried to shake me down for money. Like my money is that easy to steal. He spoke with an intense, heavy edge. Chloe's heart gave a violent thump at his sharp tone, and she fell dead silent, but her mind flashed back to the image of that man kicking him, making him stumble against the wall. Why did that man beat you? She finally couldn't resist asking softly. Asher instantly turned sharp as a razor blade, his gaze icy and detached. You mean Richard? The two of them shared an unspoken understanding. He knew exactly who she was asking about. It sounded like family, yet he referred to him directly by his full name. Chloe stole a glance at him. Since you already saw it, there's no harm in telling you. That's my dad. As for why he beat me when I was the one being extorted, honestly, I don't know. He doesn't need a reason to hit me. As Asher said this, a mocking expression appeared on his face, directed at Richard, and even more so at himself. Hard to imagine, right? Who would have thought a straight-A student still gets beaten up by his parents? Chloe fell completely silent. She stared at him quietly. Rain pattered crisply against her umbrella, and the entire world seemed to bob and sway within the watery veil, giving everything a floating, drifting sensation. I won't tell anyone else. Chloe felt any words of comfort would sound utterly hollow, so she could only offer this solemn promise. Asher offered a non-committal smile, and instead said, prying into other people's private matters is actually quite impolite. Sure enough, Chloe's face twisted in awkwardness. But it's just because you happened to witness it. And I only brought it up because you asked, though I don't like talking about my own business with anyone else. It's pointless. Chloe felt a lump forming her throat. She felt a sudden urge to cry. Whispering softly, I'm sorry. She suddenly realized that she had unintentionally offended Asher. A strong wind blew against the girl's bangs. She looked completely at a loss, unsure of what to do. Asher merely maintained his faint smile, saying, go on ahead. I'll head in after a bit. Chloe looked at him with lingering hesitation. Not far away was a row of neon storefront signs, flashing red, green, and purple, their lights flickering on and off, making the boy's lone silhouette look profoundly isolated. Are you really mad at me? Chloe asked weakly. I'm so sorry. I just asked without thinking. Asher raised his eyebrows, as if finding it amusing. No, we've known each other for a while now. Did I ever say I was mad at you? Chloe lowered her gaze, staring at the scattered light on the ground, and stood there in a daze. He added, don't worry, I'm not that petty. A trace of amusement returned to Asher's voice. His temper was utterly unpredictable. Sometimes terrible, and sometimes wonderful. Right now, he chuckled at Chloe. A deep, shimmering light reflecting in his eyes. Don't look like a total pushover. I just need a smoke. Go find a place to wait. Don't you already share this secret of mine? The boy reached up to run his fingers through his hair from his forehead. This single movement possessed an indescribably vibrant vitality. Chloe's heart hammered wildly, feeling exactly like she had just eaten passion fruit, fragrant and sweet. She did her absolute best to suppress the smile tugging at her lips, and gave a small nod, wanting to say, I'll head out first then. But in the end, she said nothing at all, and left with her umbrella, back in the classroom. Her heart was still fluttering in a completely chaotic mess, failing to calm down for quite a long time. Jenna was sneakily eating snacks again, and even sharing them with the boys in the back row. She asked Chloe if she wanted some, while Chloe looked at her several times, hesitating to speak. What's wrong? Jenna asked, popping a potato chip into her mouth. Are you still going to give that certain someone a letter? Chloe felt a pang of shame over her own little scheme. She pretended to look perfectly composed. Jenna instantly caught her drift, remembering something as she rummaged through her desk drawer for a while, then suddenly perked up, as if possessed by a sudden burst of energy. If you hadn't brought it up, I would have completely forgotten to write it. I need to finish using up this large letter paper. What was that phrase you told me last time? Every beginning has an end, right? Exactly, just for the sake of this letter paper. I can't waste my money when it's this thick. Blushing, Chloe pretended to complain. Fine, I'll just use it to practice my writing. The sound of rain never stopped, and the school was completely enveloped in a blanket of autumn as the wind whistled mournfully. She knew that some things felt better once written down, by putting it into words. She could continue studying without any distractions. It felt as though it didn't even matter whether Asher ever read it or not. Hope this letter finds you well. I saw your name on the bulletin board in first place. Congratulations. Perhaps this kind of honors is a regular occurrence for you. But for us, it is a source of heartfelt admiration. I believe you will definitely have a magnificent future and the brightest path ahead. The words above sounded rather formal and official. I'm so sorry. It rained today. It's a bit cold, so I think you should wear more clothes, so you don't easily get sick. I didn't originally like this bleak, dreary season of autumn rain, but today I feel inexplicably happy. I think the rain is actually quite lovely. I wonder if you've noticed too. The sound of rain falling on the school bike shed is much louder. I mean, compared to it hitting the ground. On the way back to the classroom, passing by the bike shed, I suddenly thought of my last letter. I wonder if you saw it. It's fine if you didn't see it though, because the most important thing is that I recorded everything I wanted to say to you. Even though it's not the work of a master writer, the very moment it was recorded becomes an eternity to the person involved. I have some reflections today that I want to share with you. It seems like nothing truly matters in high school life, except for studying. In the eyes of teachers or parents, our emotions are just making a fuss over nothing, just teenage angst. But I think it's actually not like that at all. Everyone has their own struggles, completely unknown to outsiders. Just like I've never believed that when someone commits suicide out of immense pain, it's simply because they are a coward. Sometimes adults, and even kids our own age, underestimate the complexity of someone's feelings, making them feel utterly isolated and alone. Me writing this definitely doesn't mean I'm a pessimistic person. What I really want to say is, no matter what a person is currently enduring, as long as they still have a healthy body and a sharp mind, they should take a closer inventory of the things they currently possess so they don't feel quite so miserable and can rebuild their confidence in life. Sorry, I feel like I'm lecturing like an old professor again. I just hope you don't think I'm a total old fogey. Let me talk about something else then. Every single word I'm writing to you right now is incredibly important to me. It's to the extent of being the second most important thing right after studying. Just being able to write them out makes me so incredibly happy. Hoping you are doing well is my only wish today. These words won't expire. They won't be like pills, and they won't be like food with a shelf life. They are completely infinite. The rain still hasn't stopped. Even though I don't like autumn rain, I love falling asleep to the sound of the pattering drops. It would be wonderful if this rain lasted all night long. By the way, may I ask, can you see the tree outside the window, the one near the library? I can catch a faint, blurry glimpse of it from my window every time I pass by there after evening study hall. Even though I know perfectly well it's a tree, I always mistake it for a person and get a little start. I'm really so silly. Speaking of which, I remember one time back at home, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and a family member's overcoat was hanging in the living room. Half asleep, I thought someone was standing there, and it scared me half to death. Looking back now, I still think it's pretty hilarious. Before I knew it, I've written a whole bunch of nonsense again. I always fall into this habit the moment I pick up a pen. Words pouring out of me like an overflowing river. This is the second letter I've written to you. Best wishes. The letter was delivered after the first period of evening study hall. For doing this, Dylan even scammed a bottle of sports drink out of Jenna. The heavy rain beat down diagonally. By the classroom door, the railings were packed with umbrellas, mostly black and gray. The dark glass windows reflected the scattered silhouettes of a few students. Chloe just sat there perfectly still, her mind completely serene. The letter was finished, feeling like a completed mission, because she harbored absolutely no hope at all. She could instead throw herself entirely into her studies for the next period. Dylan wasn't close with Asher, but since they were guys, they always spoke directly and without any fuss. He knocked straight on Class 1's window, and when someone opened it, he asked them to call Asher over. The boy came out quickly. "Your letter," Dylan said, handing it to him, acting as if he assumed Asher already knew who it was from. Asher took it in his hand and glanced down, seeing it was the exact same envelope as the one he had opened on the balcony last time. He shook the letter in his hand and asked, "Who wrote this?" Only then did Dylan realize Asher wasn't an ordinary guy. He got way too many love letters. He must have completely forgotten about the last one long ago. He knew it. Jenna was wasting her time. These girls were all just completely obsessed with Asher. Jenna from Class 2. Dude, you probably don't know which one she is, right? Let me point her out to you. Dylan was being incredibly eager, but Asher remained thoroughly indifferent. An unfamiliar name? He had absolutely no interest in getting to know a stranger. No need. She's sitting right by the window. Dylan cut himself off mid-sentence. Jenna was currently peeking over from the end of the hallway like a thief. He grinned and pointed a finger at her. "She's the one who wrote it to you. At the end of the hallway, among a group of girls, Asher cast a brief glance, completely failing to make out who was who. He muttered, "Thanks," turned around, and walked back into the classroom. A genius was a genius after all, always carrying himself with such distinct aloofness. Dylan slouched back and started teasing Jenna again, and the two of them began bickering and fooling around in the classroom. Chloe didn't say a word. She quietly rested her head on the desk and spaced out for a bit. And once the bell for the second period of evening study hall rang, she cleared her mind completely and began earnestly working on her study materials. The autumn rain drizzled continuously, never letting up. Mayfield High was very large, and there was quite a distance from the school building to the dorms. Evening study hall wrapped up at 10 o'clock. The crowd surged toward the hot water room, a long line of streetlights stretching ahead. Moving forward in an orderly line, the path was covered in open umbrellas everywhere. Asher wasn't in a rush to leave, standing alone by the window of the emptied hallway to read the letter. The sound of rain pattered right by his ear. He actually looked out through the window to search for the tree near the library, which was just a dark, shadowy mass. The shadow stood so tall, it didn't look like a person no matter how you looked at it. In the cafeteria, some students were eating late-night snacks. The weather had turned freezing overnight, making everyone exceptionally prone to hunger, especially high schoolers who were still growing during puberty. Their appetites were incredibly massive. Some kids went through a very awkward phase during these few years, growing thick and stocky from eating so much, marking a total low point in their looks that no one wanted to look back on. Most people's features were still completely unformed anyway, so being able to look genuinely attractive during this time and instantly striking was exceptionally rare. Chloe's grandmother knew how to make sweet chili paste, giving 1 jar to her and 1 jar to Jenna. Dylan had seen the two girls dipping fried chicken legs into the paste to eat in the cafeteria. He tried it once and got hooked, so he shamelessly asked Clun to offer some after they finished filling their water bottles. The three of them huddled around, using warm steamed buns to dip into the paste. Dylan had a massive mouth. With one single bite, half the bun vanished. He could eat 3 steamed buns in one sitting, which meant exactly 6 bites. Chloe did weird math problems in her head, while Jenna kept yelling at him, "You're so shameless. The jar is so tiny, and you're going to empty it all out after a few scoops. How selfish can you be? Why are you getting so worked up? It's Chloe's anyway. It's not even yours. If you have the guts, don't eat mine. Chloe's grandmother gave this to me too. Why are you stealing from my share?" The two of them were trading barbs back and forth, when Dylan suddenly yelled out, "Asher, Jenna's inviting you to try some chili paste." The moment those words left his mouth, the one whose heart stopped completely was Chloe. She couldn't help but look up. Over by the cafeteria entrance, sure enough, a familiar figure was standing right there. He was shaking off the rain under the light. The boy was currently closing his umbrella. Dylan's eyes were truly razor-sharp. Jenna shrieked and immediately covered her face. Squirming around in her seat, she was genuinely feeling embarrassed. To let her idol see her sitting here eating steamed buns with chili paste. It felt super awkward. However, Asher turned out to be much more natural and poised than they expected. As he walked closer, he looked over in their direction. Beside her, Jenna said in a bit of a flurry, "Hey, Asher, are you here to refuel too? Do you want some paste?" Chloe's mouth felt stiff, and her chewing naturally slowed down. The more people there were, the less courage she had to look up at Asher, only staring at the dark glass jar. "Thank you. I'm not really used to eating this. You guys enjoy your meal." Asher said this while looking at Jenna. Jenna. So she was Jenna. He silently repeated the name in his mind, finding it hard to connect her appearance with those 2 letters together. Meanwhile, sitting quietly to the side was another person. The girl hadn't even lifted her face, her cheeks bulging slightly as if she were completely focused on eating. Asher suddenly found her quite amusing, pretending not to see him so quickly. Not many cafeteria windows were open, so Asher just bought something random to fill his stomach. He didn't really care much about what he ate or wore. Richard was meticulous about everything, so he was casual about everything. The rain outside picked up for a bit. Dylan began humming "Cold Rainy Night" right there, his voice like a broken gong, cracking after just a couple of lines. Jenna covered her ears in sheer annoyance, but Chloe asked him seriously, "Whose song is that, Beyond?" The lead singer was Wang Kakui. Dylan mentioned a name that was completely foreign to Chloe. Most teenage girls liked Jay-Cho, so Wong Ka-kui was a name that sounded like it belonged to an older generation. Asking further, sure enough, she learned it was a rock band from Hong Kong, and the lead singer had passed away when their generation was only 2 years old. No wonder she didn't know about it. Dylan pulled out his MP3 player and handed an earbud to Chloe, saying with a smile, "But this one was originally sung by Wong Ka-kyung." The moment she put on the earbud and the prelude played, it truly felt as though precious pearls were rolling down. Chloe instantly fell in love with this song. While they were discussing Hong Kong singers, unbeknownst to them, Asher's figure had already vanished at some point. Neither Dylan nor Jenna paid it any mind. But Chloe noticed. He had walked straight out after buying his food, without casting a single glance in their direction. "I want to share this song with you," Chloe thought silently. On the way back, the rain under the streetlights looked like a hazy mist of fine needles. She stared intently at the rain all the way back, knowing that Asher probably hadn't read that letter. The osmanthus flowers at school had withered. The weather grew colder, and it got dark even earlier. The days passed by one after another, and no one harbored any expectations for that letter anymore. Once the midterm exams were over, everyone suddenly realized that time could fly so fast. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the first semester of freshman year had passed. Calculating it this way, it felt as though senior year would be right around the corner very soon. On the midterm exams, Chloe's ranking didn't rise but instead dropped by 2 places, which really stung, even though her level of hard work was exactly the same as before. Dropping 2 places in the class meant she dropped even more across the entire grade. On the bulletin board, Asher was still the dazzling number 1, perfectly stable. His score for every single subject was firmly etched in Chloe's mind. The gap was massive. The girl couldn't help but feel a bit gloomy, although she didn't know either why she would ridiculously compare herself to Asher. If anything, she should be using someone with Mackenzie's grades as her benchmark. Returning home over the weekend, she told her grandparents about the midterms. Grandfather was washing fish, a faint, fishy smell drifting through the kitchen. A bloody mess sat inside the trash can. Chloe squatted beside him to help peel garlic. "Don't be arrogant in victory, and don't lose heart in defeat. It's completely normal for rankings to fluctuate, right? Just work harder next time, and you'll be fine." Grandfather began chopping the fish head, his voice full of vigor. On the stovetop sat some Sichuan peppercorns, picked from the peppercorn tree back in their hometown in early autumn. Chloe murmured in agreement, picking up 2 peppercorns to gently sniff them beneath her nose. They carried the scent of the seasons. Grandmother was stringing red chili peppers in the living room. They lived on the first floor, with a small vegetable garden by the door, where they grew some vegetables. Whatever they couldn't finish, they would give to the neighbors. Hearing the 2 of them talk about her grades, she started discussing with her husband about getting tutoring for Chloe. "That's so expensive." That was Chloe's very first reaction. She didn't want tutoring. But math and physics were indeed her weak spots. However, she wanted to choose humanities. So physics tutoring would be a waste. "You still need to get some help with math," Grandmother said. Chloe stared at the string of red chilies, unable to make up her mind. Humanities math would be easier in junior year, right? Maybe it would naturally get better. "Plan ahead for a rainy day," Grandmother said, untying her apron. "Your math isn't actually that bad. A little tutoring will take it to the next level. Who knows, maybe there's just one concept you haven't grasped yet. And once it clicks, everything will open up." The elderly woman even made a funny gesture. Chloe laughed along with her. The family discussed it over the course of the meal, and decided that during the winter break, they would hire a one-on-one math tutor for Chloe. The office building where the tutoring center was located was downtown. They offered a trial class. So, Grandfather took Chloe along to check out the situation first. As they were getting into the elevator, she noticed a teenage boy carrying a guitar was just a few steps away from the elevator doors. Chloe hurriedly held down the door open button. The boy was wearing a hoodie, with half his head buried inside the hood. His baggy, wide-leg jeans were a faded, vintage color, looking, well, very cool. The exact instant he stepped inside, Chloe had a word pop into her head that everyone loved to use. "Thanks," the boy offered his thanks, without even lifting his head. The elevator doors slowly shut. The space was cramped, and Chloe instantly froze. She recognized Asher from his voice. The office building housed a music store, and Asher had come to buy some accessories. Chloe discreetly observed him, standing in a corner, with her grandfather right beside her. She had to act completely natural. if she were to say hello? It had to look like the most ordinary acquaintance between schoolmates. But in reality, that was exactly what they were. The weather was chilly, and Chloe's throat didn't feel very comfortable. A sudden tickle hit her, and she wanted to cough but was terrified of disturbing Asher. So, like a little kitten, she covered her mouth and let out 2 muffled coughs. Grandfather suddenly called out to her, "Chloe, did you catch a cold?" "Oh!" She threw into a total panic instantly. Sure enough, Asher turned around in front of her. He yanked his hood back, revealing his longer hair. It was a little messy, but unexpectedly looked very attractive. She loved his hair. Chloe managed to squeeze out an exceptionally awkward smile, lifting her hand just a fraction. She didn't even know why. She was greeting him like this, saying hi or whatever, but whenever classmates occasionally ran into each other on the street, they would always just say hi like this. Grandfather looked at the two of them in surprise. Clearly, he hadn't expected that the boy who entered the elevator last was someone Chloe knew. The elevator doors opened. Asher stepped off on the same floor as the grandfather and granddaughter. He was far more natural and poised than her, offering a small smile to Chloe, and then casually greeted Chloe's grandfather too. Grandfather, a straightforward speaker, directly told Asher that Chloe was here to find a tutor, and went on to ask him if he was looking to get tutoring too. She immediately tugged on her grandfather's sleeve, her face flushing red, saying awkwardly, "He's the #1 student at our school." The moment the words left her mouth, she instantly regretted it. Grown-ups were always like that. If you let your elders know your classmate was the top-ranked student, then a rapid-fire barrage of, "Wow, that's amazing. Look at how other people study," and other comments of that nature would definitely ring endlessly in her ears. Although grandfather wasn't quite that dramatic, he still gave Asher a thumbs up, saying with a grin, "Chloe, you should ask your classmate for advice more often. Finding the right way to study gets you twice the result with half the effort." Asher maintained a basic level of politeness and quickly said, "I'll head over there first. Goodbye, goodbye." Chloe waved her hand stiffly. Her pounding heart finally settled back down. She didn't really dare to look her grandfather in the eye, terrified that the elderly man would spot any clues. As she walked, she said, "Grandfather, Asher and I aren't in the same class, and we're not close, so I felt a bit embarrassed to greet him today. And yet, you still told me to ask him for advice so much." Grandfather thought nothing of it. What's wrong with that? Classmates are supposed to help each other out. Hearing these words made Chloe smile again. This sounded like something an elementary school teacher loved to say. She thought, if a whole crowd of people went to ask him for help every day, how would he ever get any of his own studying done? During the trial class, Grandfather headed back home first. When she took after-school enrichment classes as a little girl, Grandfather would ride his bicycle to drop her off and pick her up. She would wear a little skirt and knee-high socks, the bows on her shoes fluttering with every movement in the breeze. Later on, she could take the bus by herself. Now that she was a high school student, if she were doing something for the very first time, Grandfather would still insist on accompanying her. So, even without a mother and father, it didn't seem to be a huge problem. She hadn't expected today to be full of one coincidence after another. During a break between classes, she ran into Asher again near the restrooms. Today she felt as if she were truly blessed by the god of luck. Chloe held her breath. "Why do you always like to pretend you don't see me?" Asher smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Is it because I like you that I pretend not to see you?" Chloe froze before instantly snapping out of it, hurriedly explaining in a flurry of panic, "No, it's not." As she spoke, the girl clutched at her clothes. "Just kidding." Asher glanced past her shoulder a few times. "Are you here for math tutoring?" Chloe nodded. She couldn't resist asking him, "What about you? I saw that the case you're carrying looks like a guitar. Do you play an instrument?" "I just learn it for fun when I'm bored. You know how to do so many things." She offered a cautious compliment, while Asher looked completely unbothered. "It's just messing around. And I'm not even playing at that. Well, it's just to pass the time." He always spoke like this, everything feeling as light as a feather, as if absolutely nothing carried any weight to him in this world. "I think you must play it really well. Just like how you handle your studies, with complete ease." Chloe tried her absolute best to sound conversational. While she spoke the previous sentence, her mind was already anxiously preparing and figuring out what she should say next. Asher offered a small smile. "I just learned it casually like that. There were some top-performing students who absolutely hated it when others said they were hard-working, or when they were caught studying hard. They would always say they did poorly on a test, or that they hadn't reviewed well. Yet the moment the exam scores were released, they were as excellent as ever. Asher never said anything against his conscience. He wasn't falsely modest, nor did he boast. He just said things exactly as they were. Without him having to make a deliberate effort to prove it, Chloe knew that he was telling the truth. It was truly strange. She believed every single thing he said. If only I were half as smart as you, then I wouldn't need tutoring, the girl said with a touch of reserve. Asher looked thoroughly detached, saying carelessly, "What's the point of tutoring for math? It's just the same concepts over and over again." Chloe felt incredibly embarrassed by his words, as if she were an absolute idiot. For a moment she had no idea what to say next. Asher finally realized his phrasing had been a bit insensitive. He could only offer a smile and say, "I didn't mean to call you stupid. Maybe." He paused to think for a brief moment. "It just hasn't clicked for you yet." The boy looked down at his watch. "I have to get going." She didn't expect time to completely stand still. Just letting it slip away a bit slower would be enough. Chloe suppressed her emotions and curved her lips slightly. "Okay, goodbye." Asher had already turned around, but suddenly turned his head back to call out to her. It was just the most ordinary calling of her name, but Chloe felt as if a sharp, throbbing pang of pain instantly crept through her chest, tugging tightly at her heart. She had no idea why the sensation was so intense. Trying her best to look calm, she turned back. "Is there something else?" "That girl, Jenna. Asher had only brought it up on a sudden whim, but as the words reached his lips, they seemed to be scattered by the wind, leaving him completely unsure of how to phrase it. He smiled and shook his head. "Never mind. Your essay was read aloud in class by the literature teacher again." Chloe could only smooth down her hair. "My essays aren't actually that good. I don't know if it's just my imagination." Asher started, hesitating to speak further. He blinked his eyes, and suddenly shifted the topic completely. "The tree in front of the school library looks exactly like a person standing stiffly out there at night. Have you ever noticed it?" Her heart rate abruptly spun out of control, caught completely off guard. Chloe even forgot to blink her eyes. Did he find out something? Why is he asking this? Their eyes met briefly, like a dragonfly lightly skimming across the water's surface. She did her absolute best to fake a confused expression, her voice trembling slightly. "A tree! There's a tree near the library? I don't think I ever noticed it." "Is that so?" Asher said. It was hard to tell what he felt upon hearing this answer. Something subtle and vague that no words could accurately describe. He offered a silent smile, turned around, and left. The boy finally stepped into the elevator. Chloe stood frozen on the spot, in a daze for a brief moment, before suddenly sprinting over to the window in one breath. Fixing her eyes intently on the ground below, she was waiting for a single figure to appear. Very soon, the boy's hoodie, his jeans, and the guitar on his back came vividly into view. Chloe stared without blinking at that figure, as it moved effortlessly, entirely unbothered by anyone else's gaze, like wild grass running free, capable of growing without any boundaries. He passed by the fountain, then circled around the flower bed, and walked beneath the tree to get his bicycle. Riding it straight down the steps, bumping a few times along the way, there was a traffic light ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, Chloe counted silently in her mind. Asher waited 17 seconds for the red light. Then he crossed to the opposite side, where silk trees were planted along the road. Not until the boy's silhouette completely vanished into the surging traffic and could no longer be distinguished did Chloe suddenly turn around and lean against the glass window, her hands completely empty. Asher's hair had already grown past the school's dress code regulations. His homeroom teacher tactfully reminded him, "You need to get a haircut." The texture of his hair was exceptionally good, pitch black, glossy, and full of natural volume. From a distance, it looked wildly layered and unkempt. Asher went to a tiny barbershop down an alley, the kind that only charged a few dollars per cut, getting a quick, simple trim without cutting it too short. It gave him the look of a 1990s Hong Kong movie star. The boy owned a rust-red button-up shirt, a vintage style that he paired with a casual jacket, looking like a stunning cactus. Looking like this made him stand out immensely at school, because none of his peers dressed that way. Even the teachers didn't quite know what to say when they saw him. Asher was the top student, and his father was a prominent local entrepreneur who frequently made donations to the school. The kind who occasionally made the local news. So when it came to his eccentric individuality, the teachers basically turned a blind eye. right up until he was caught smoking on the balcony during a surprise inspection by the dorm supervisor. The dorm supervisor looked at his outfit, and seeing how handsome he was, she concluded he was a brat who didn't study hard and only cared about dating. She gave him a well-meaning lecture. It was clearly mid-afternoon at the time, the sun shining brightly, but the wind was dry and cold, blowing his hair over his eyes, only revealing a pair of handsome eyes, like floating clouds obscuring the sun. The supervisor stared at, wishing she could just chop off all that hair before leaving. While he was getting chewed out on the balcony, the girls in the opposite dorm building discovered during this very incident that Asher from Class 1 actually lived on this floor. Everyone crowded onto the balconies to watch, excitedly whispering, "It's Asher." Strangely enough, the students didn't gossip about which pretty girl was wearing what beautiful clothes, but focused on him instead. Asher rarely wore his school uniform, his hairstyle, and his clothes would always become the center of attention behind his back. The girls unanimously agreed that the top-ranked student was actually quite a show-off, but they completely misunderstood Asher. He always just bought whatever caught his eye and wore whatever he pleased. He didn't do it to attract attention. He didn't have that kind of mindset at all. Jenna kept hoping that in the boys' dorm opposite them, some decent-looking guy would appear, but unfortunately, there never was one. The balconies were filled with boys' clothes hanging to dry, some even hanging loose underwear that looked like old rags, fluttering out there too. The girls didn't mean to judge, but they couldn't help but complain. There was even a bright red pair, which made them dizzy with disbelief. She pulled Chloe along, leaning over the railing with great interest to look at Asher. The balcony was filled with the girls' playful laughter. Chloe's gaze blended in with everyone else's curious stares, feeling rarely at ease. She quietly watched him, her eyes curving into a tiny smile, counting carefully. Ever since the flag-bearer duty rotated to other classes, her chances of seeing Asher were practically zero. Every time she passed by Class 1, she wanted to pretend to casually steal a glance inside, but it happened too fast to even tell if he was there or not. Chloe would have no choice but to guiltily pull her gaze back. It turned out that even with just a wall between them, running into each other was still so difficult. The girls had all put on sweaters and thick coats, as cold fronts paid visits every few days. Those who feared the cold were already wearing down jackets. Asher always wore very few layers. He still wore a button-up shirt, covered by a wash-faded denim jacket, looking like he didn't feel the cold or heat. Mackenzie was on the adjacent balcony, which was close to Chloe's dorm room. The girls from the two dorms craned their necks to chat with each other like this. They were talking about Asher, like how the girls from that class were pursuing him again, or how he looked so remarkably stylish, or how he had such a cool personality, just rambling on about all sorts of things. Mackenzie suddenly said, "You guys are really underestimating him. Asher is someone with great ambitions, and he's going abroad for further studies. And besides, he's not the type to deliberately act cool or show off. That's way too childish." The noisy voices quieted down for a split second. Everyone knew Mackenzie shared a deep history with him. Middle school classmates, who could walk across classes to ask him questions. It felt like Mackenzie was much more qualified to judge Asher, whereas they would always view him through their shallowest imaginations. Chloe felt her heart instantly tighten up, crumpling into a ball, as she focused with all her might, hoping that Mackenzie would talk a bit more about him, revealing the Asher they didn't know. All the air seemed to turn completely still. All the whistling wind felt redundant. She only wanted to hear every single word falling from Mackenzie's lips concerning him. But very soon, her hopes were dashed. Mackenzie clearly stopped there, acting as if she wanted to defend him, but stubbornly refusing to go into deeper details. A faint wave of melancholy suddenly drifted through her heart. Chloe's dazed expression as she stared at Mackenzie was caught by Callie. When everyone dispersed, he told Mackenzie, the dorm leader, "I think Chloe seems a bit jealous of you." The words rolled right off his tongue. Callie still remembered every glare and movement Jenna had directed at him back then. Mackenzie froze slightly for a moment, then asked with a smile, "Oh, when you were talking about Asher, she kept staring at you with a very strange look. Anyway, it was just really weird." Callie looked at Mackenzie with a touch of flattery. "You have such incredible grades, and your parents are so prominent. Honestly, it's only normal for people to be jealous of you. Maybe you're just overthinking it," Mackenzie said reservedly. "When I talk about Asher, everyone stares at me, don't they?" Mackenzie was very subtle, but she saw through it perfectly clear. Of course, she also remembered that Callie had gotten into arguments with Chloe and Jenna. Callie's face instantly flushed bright red, and sheepishly tried to patch things up. Then maybe I really am just overthinking it. You're right. Way too many people like Asher. Even Jenna wrote him a love letter, though Asher would definitely never look her way. Mackenzie offered a brief smile, and didn't continue the conversation. Did you sign up for a performance for the New Year's gala? Callie was still forcing small talk, and the atmosphere felt quite awkward. He asked another question. Mackenzie nodded. I did. I don't know if it'll get cut, though. She hadn't just signed up for a performance. She had also dragged Asher into it. She knew Asher played an instrument, so the two of them putting on a performance together would be incredibly meaningful. Looking back many years later, this would be a radiant beam of light from her youth, belonging exclusively to her and Asher. Rather than saying she liked Asher, it was more that she admired him. Mackenzie had followed the rules since childhood, always being the perfect model child. She was perfect in every single aspect, hardly ever making a mistake. A textbook definition of an exemplary student, with excellent grades, getting along with classmates, and loving hard work. Asher was never like that. He was an outlier among the top-performing students. In reality, everyone envied him. Anyone who had ever been his classmate simply couldn't ignore him. At Asher's age, it was a period where one's sense of self formed rapidly. Everyone wanted to be a little bit different, or felt like they were exceptionally special. Looking back many years later, in truth, most people's youth unfolded exactly like this. Their hearts full of dramatic ups and downs, their thoughts delicate and constantly shifting. Once they were thoroughly beaten down by society, and those youthful traits faded away, they themselves would be shocked by the way they used to be. Youth was truly wonderful. Except too many people went through youth without even realizing it, and by the time they looked back in panicked wonder, they were already old. Asher had never deliberately tried to be different. It was just that his very existence was already one of a kind. The dorm supervisor went to find Class 1's homeroom teacher, and the teacher could only offer a helpless smile, saying she would lecture him properly. The boys in his dorm room, meanwhile, were talking about how the girls were thoroughly obsessed with him, treating Asher exactly like a celebrity. There was a subtle trace of jealousy among the boys, too. For instance, Asher frequently received love letters, and all kinds of gifts, like glass jars filled with paper stars and chocolates, handmade cookies, and CDs, all showcasing the girls' delicate thoughts. All of these belonged exclusively to Asher. While the boys ate the treats he tossed over to them, they would crack half-serious, envious jokes, but they didn't really take it to heart either. After arriving at the classroom in the afternoon, Jenna's temporary interest flared up yet again. She powdered her mouth, sighing, "Sigh, I really hope Asher writes back. I'm so dying to know what he'd write in a reply." She let out groan after sigh, complaining non-stop. Actually, it had been a while since she wrote a letter to Asher. Since he didn't reply, there was nothing anyone could do. Especially from after the October holiday break, all the way until New Year's. There were absolutely no holiday breaks throughout November and December. Jenna felt bored. When a person gets bored, they just want to act thirsty. That was according to that shameless bastard Dylan. When Chloe heard it for the first time, she was completely shocked. But she also inexplicably admired Dylan for making such a crude remark sound so perfectly fitting for puberty. Jenna was just bringing it up again. For some reason, Dylan behind her must have had donkey ears, leaning in with a pair of smiling eyes. He asked if the two of them were plotting how to fangirl over Asher again, like it's any of your business. That was Jenna's signature catchphrase. She got along very well with the guys, blending right in with them. Aside from Mackenzie, she was also a very popular girl. She was a tomboy, and her gender felt rather blurry in the eyes of the boys, always laughing and fooling around. Callie silently watched them over and over from afar, a contemptuous smirk playing on the girl's lips. Jenna was a total idiot, and Chloe loved to act frail and weak. They were truly a match made in heaven, a pair of absolute trash best friends. Because the weekend was approaching, combined with New Year's Day being just around the corner, everyone was feeling restless. No one could really settle down. The class committee was discussing how to decorate the classroom, who would host, how to write the transitions, and who to borrow the sound system from. Only Chloe sat quietly behind a mountain-like pile of study materials and began writing a letter. She wanted to say to Asher in the letter ahead of time, "Happy New Year. Just such a simple, tiny wish. Chloe, Mackenzie called out as she walked over to find her, startling Chloe so much her entire body went rigid. Her mind completely short-circuited for a second, and she subconsciously pulled an atlas over to cover the letter paper. She offered an exceptionally unnatural smile. Mackenzie, of course, spotted her bizarre reaction. However, she didn't have a habit of prying into other people's privacy. Her eyes filled with warmth and earnestness. "Could you help write the transitions for our class's New Year's gala?" Chloe froze for a moment. Mackenzie smiled. "Look, I completely forgot to ask you. Are you planning to sign up for a performance?" Chloe let out a quiet sigh of relief. She shook her head. "I don't know how to do anything. I'm completely tone-deaf, and my limbs are stiff as a board." These words made Mackenzie burst into a hearty laugh, revealing her gums. She glanced outside and said, "Come with me to buy some balloons. It'll be the perfect chance to chat about the performances and transitions, and figure out how we should write them." Chloe wanted to refuse. She actually didn't like participating in these events, preferring to just be an audience member. Unfortunately, she was the #1 essay writer in everyone's hearts, so she naturally had to step up for this kind of cultural activity. It grew dark early, and the small shops near the school gates were brightly lit. Business had been booming like crazy lately. With so many classes at Mayfield High, everyone except the seniors was completely energized and pumped up because New Year's was approaching. The shop was packed with the figures of girls, and the two of them blended into the crowd. Dazzling decorations filled the space, along with deafening dance music. Mackenzie swayed her body to the rhythm and casually asked Chloe which Chinese singer she liked. "I don't have a specific favorite. Lately, I've been liking Wong Kar-kui." She responded to Mackenzie quite earnestly. "What about you?" Mackenzie's eyes sparkled brightly, as if she had thought of something. She said, "I like Pushu. He's very unique, isn't he? I like special people, the kind who never just drift along with the crowd, for some unknown reason." The girl's smile grew even brighter when she said those words, shining like a dazzling star. Chloe wanted to offer her a couple of compliments, but she wasn't very good at saying things like that. She paused for a moment, before squeezing out a line. "I think you're pretty special too." "Really? What a coincidence. I feel exactly the same way about you." "Ha," Mackenzie burst out laughing again. When she said that, Chloe instead felt rather embarrassed. By the time the two of them left the shop, the food stalls were scattered and quiet, warm steam silently drifting upward. This hour was no longer the peak dinner time for students. Inside a large tent selling fried noodles, under the dim lights, sat a boy eating noodles in huge mouthfuls. It was Asher. "Asher," Mackenzie suddenly called out. Chloe gave a slight start and lifted her head. Sure enough, the boy's gaze swept over toward them. The chance encounter she had anticipated for so long occurred just like that, completely out of the blue. Chloe's very first reaction was that she felt completely redundant. Asher and Mackenzie were the ones who were actually close acquaintances. "How about you head back first?" Mackenzie thoughtfully suggested to Chloe. The balloons in her hand were naturally shoved into Chloe's grasp. In her understanding, Chloe and Asher shared absolutely no connection, so it might feel awkward. Out of pure kindness, she let Chloe return to the classroom first. This kind of kindness instantly caused Chloe to plunge into a swamp of bitterness. She felt a rush of panic, but masked it well enough beneath the cover of the night. Okay, I'll head out first then." She did her absolute best to restrain herself, suppressing her desire to steal a few more glances as she straightened her back and walked toward the school without once looking back. The faint murmur of voices drifted from behind her. She knew the two of them had started talking, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. How pathetic, Chloe thought silently as she walked to the school gates. The wall by the gate cast a deep shadow, and standing within that darkness, she finally stole a quiet glance back. The distance was a bit too far now. She could only see beneath the tent canopy, the busy figure of the owner moving past, and sparks flying from beneath that iron walk. However, she couldn't see Asher anywhere. The sensation felt exactly like those sparks dying out right in the palm of her hand, leaving a cold dampness behind as she melancholically turned around and stepped out of the shadow. The streetlights stretched her shadow exceptionally long. The classroom was rather chaotic. When Chloe walked in, she saw Callie standing right by her desk, holding something in her hand. In a split second, Chloe felt all the blood rush straight to her face. Losing all control, she practically sprinted over and snatched the item out of Callie's hand. It wasn't the letter. It was just that Callie had accidentally knocked over one of her study guides while passing by. But since she hadn't seen what happened before, Chloe's movements were visibly aggressive. Her face was flushed bright red, her heart still hammering powerfully against her chest. Callie stared at her in complete shock, and a few boys in the back rows also witnessed the scene. Was that really necessary, Chloe? Callie's face was completely written with displeasure, and she let out a sharp scoff. An intense rush of self-preservation completely took over Sling. Oh, her voice completely altering as she snapped. Why are you going through my things without permission? What are you talking about? Callie rolled her eyes in annoyance. I accidentally knocked it over, and wasn't I just picking it back up for you? What is wrong with you? Losing your temper over something so incredibly trivial. Which of your eyes saw me going through your study materials? From behind Chloe, the class president stepped in to play peacemaker. Callie is telling the truth. I saw it happen. You probably misunderstood her. Chloe felt intensely mortified. Her mouth opened slightly, wanting to squeeze out an apology, but Callie had already spoken up with a cold sneer. Don't you usually act all frail and weak? Who knew your voice could be so incredibly loud? She said this while directing a face that clearly yelled, You're such a hypocrite. Right at Chloe. Jenna was nowhere to be found, having run off somewhere. If she had been there, it would have definitely turned into a brutal screaming match. Chloe, knowing she was in the wrong, didn't fight back, only murmuring a quiet, I'm sorry. All she knows how to do is pretend to be a lady. Callie grumbled. Why act so fierce? When talking to boys, she turns into a fragile princess. When talking to girls, her mouth goes off like a machine gun. That's enough, Callie. It was just a small matter, isn't it fine now that it's cleared up? We're all classmates here. Harmony is what matters most. The class president stepped in to stop her. Callie was completely indignant, glaring at the class president. She was extremely dissatisfied with this kind of fence-sitting attitude. You just side with whoever knows how to fake it, don't you? Hearing this, the class president also got upset. What are you talking about? I'm just judging things as they are. How did I become what you're claiming? Callie didn't want to argue with the class president, so she turned her face away and went back to her seat, slamming her books down hard. The classroom fell silent for an instant, and by the time everyone snapped out of it, Callie had already stormed out of the classroom in a fit of pique. She ran right into Mackenzie and Asher walking side by side. Seeing her strange expression, Mackenzie called out to her, Callie, what's wrong? Where are you going? Class is about to start. Callie's eyes instantly turned red, stopping in her tracks, and said, I accidentally knocked Chloe's book down, and I already picked it up for her, but she flew off the handle at me without even asking why. She was incredibly fierce, and the class president even sided with her. She's really disgusting. All she does is act all pitiful and helpless in front of boys. I know boys just love girls who know how to fake it like her. I don't know how to fake it, so I'm the only one who gets left out. Hearing the familiar name, Asher cast a couple of glances at the girl. Callie complained loudly in the hallway, and this commotion was heard by everyone in Class 1 and Class 2. Some people slid open the windows to poke their heads out. Mackenzie had no choice but to comfort her, saying there must be some misunderstanding and so forth. While she was trying to soothe her, the mild-mannered Mr. Miller walked over. He quickly asked what was going on, then went into the classroom and called both parties out. Because Chloe was the literature representative, Callie automatically assumed Mr. Miller would side with her. Muttering curses under her breath, her heart completely filled with resentment, she stiffened her neck and said, Mr. Miller, just ask her. Chloe didn't exaggerate or add any fuel to the fire, and explained exactly what happened step by step. She admitted her own mistake first, which only made Callie detest her even more. Fake. Just keep pretending. She stared gloomily at Chloe. Mr. Miller was a good-tempered man, and patiently offered a few words of guidance regarding the two girls' conflict, before sending them both back to class. When Callie sat back down, her deskmate distinctly heard her mutter, bitch. Her deskmate looked up at her, then lowered her head with an indifferent attitude to continue working on her study. Materials. This matter, on the surface, really did seem like Chloe had overreacted and been too sensitive. When Jenna found out about this after returning, she felt it was rather strange, and couldn't help but ask Chloe what on earth was wrong. I thought she sneaked a look at the letter, so I just couldn't control myself. Chloe offered a forced smile. It was my fault. Jenna looked completely relieved. Oh, is that even worth getting so stressed over? Even if she did see it, I just openly admitted, it's no big deal. Of course, if she actually dared to snoop, I'd definitely tear into her. I could curse her out for a whole day without repeating myself. Chloe believed this. Jenna was exceptionally fierce. She hurriedly suppressed her friend's rising temper. Don't. Callie didn't snoop. I just got it wrong. Jenna, however, assumed that Chloe had taken the flak from Callie, just to protect her privacy, and insisted on treating her to a meat burger from the cafeteria after school. Chloe felt a bit guilty. She knew she hadn't. At least, that wasn't her very first reaction. She was purely terrified that the hidden secret deep in her heart would be discovered by someone. The window wasn't shut tightly, and the sound of the howling wind was like crashing ocean waves. Mr. Miller mentioned that the weather forecast predicted sleet. Time really flies so fast. She suddenly felt a bit melancholy. Winter had arrived out of nowhere. After evening study hall ended, she had originally headed downstairs with the crowd, but Chloe suddenly remembered something and ran back upstairs, her footsteps thumping along. 2 girls in the class hadn't left yet, chatting away as they locked up the door. Did you know, Callie said, that Jenna also wrote a love letter to Asher? It's absolutely hilarious. Now any random nobody thinks they can just step up and write a love letter to Asher. I wonder if he finds it annoying. Everyone's swarming him like a bunch of flies. Do they seriously have no self-awareness about their own league? There's no helping it. There are always plenty of people who lack self-awareness. The 2 of them burst into laughter, not noticing that Chloe had turned back and was walking their way. By the time they spotted her, they looked at each other in utter bewilderment, clearly worried about whether Chloe had overheard them. Chloe had indeed heard everything. She didn't say a word, merely walking over to take the initiative to greet them. She said, "The windows aren't shut properly, and it might sleet tonight." The girls offered an awkward smile. "Chloe, you're really so thoughtful. None of us even noticed. So you came back just to shut the windows?" The classroom was packed with people, so even though the weather had turned freezing, a few windows were still left cracked open a bit for ventilation. Chloe nodded. The girls hurriedly said, "Then you can lock the door. We're heading out first." With that, the 2 of them hurried away, leaving Chloe standing there alone in a daze for a few seconds. Once she snapped out of it, she stepped onto a desk and stood on her tiptoes to shut the very last window tightly before climbing back down. Chloe pulled out a tissue and repeatedly wiped down the spot where her shoes had stepped. After checking everything over once from front to back, she finally felt at ease to step outside. The classroom lock was a bit stiff. She squeezed hard with her fingers until her hand hurt, but still couldn't lock it. Chloe's face turned bright red from the exertion. The lights on the floor were about to go out any minute. She bent over, trying to see what the problem was, intending to pry the lock open. Asher's voice suddenly drifted from behind her. Chloe's back instantly went rigid. She couldn't help but look up, saying reservedly, "No, I just wanted to lock it." But echoing inside her mind was the conversation between those 2 classmates. Her gaze instantly grew dim. Hearing this, Asher directly brushed her aside. With a click, he locked it effortlessly. He let out a low chuckle. "You really don't have any strength at all, do you? I remember now. You spent all of orientation camp just sitting down." There was a hint of playful teasing in his words, leaving Chloe thoroughly embarrassed. Back then, she sat by the edge of the sports field every single day, and many people knew that there was a girl in class 2 who didn't participate in the drills, but still insisted on staying out on the sports field. To some people, this seemed incredibly high maintenance. If you're not participating, you're not participating. What's the point of sitting out there anyway? She wanted to explain that her heart wasn't good, and that she had undergone surgery, but she was also terrified that Asher would think she was just acting frail. After hesitating for a brief moment, she only said, "Thank you for helping me lock the door." Her voice sounded a bit downcast. Asher stole a glance at her. "Did you get into a fight with a classmate?" Chloe looked up in utter shock, stammering slightly. How did you know?" "When Mackenzie and I were heading back, your classmate was complaining to Mackenzie out in the hallway." Chloe's face instantly turned pale, as if something had suddenly gripped her tightly. Seeing her reaction, Asher smiled. "Don't be scared. Even though I can't really say I know you well, my intuition for reading people is usually spot on. I know you're not the way your classmate claimed. If she talks about you like that again, just confront her face to face." Chloe looked at Asher in sheer disbelief. He said, "I know. Honestly, those words were more than enough." Absolutely all of her hidden feelings for him didn't require his reciprocation. This single moment of understanding alone was enough to comfort her through her entire youth. Heaven knew how incredibly grateful she was to hear him say that. The wind whistled fiercely through the hallway. Chloe froze for a second, suddenly realizing that no one had shut the hallway windows either. She hurriedly ran over, grasping the handles to slide several windows shut with loud thuds. Asher watched her from behind, and was just about to warn her that the lights were going out, when sure enough, the girl let out a quiet gasp. He pulled out a cell phone, though cell phones weren't permitted at school. Of course, back in 2006, very few high schoolers were equipped with cell phones.